Good morning. Good morning and welcome to the Revelation 17 steering committee for this program. We've been working for a long time and we're glad that you're with us. This morning, Leon Triomat will be presenting a worship talk for us, 15 minutes. We have a rather tight schedule. After his talk, then I'll explain more about how the program extends. Let us begin with prayer. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for your word. We thank you for the book of Revelation and the opportunity to study it in these next few days. We pray for your Spirit to be with us here and to guide us in Jesus.
Theology curriculum of an Adventist school with a theological curriculum of a non-Adventist school, you will probably get in all countries, but I speak for Romania for now. You will get the following two classes that are not in non-Adventist schools in their curriculum. One class on Daniel, one class on Revelation. All the other theology schools have a prophets course which covers a little bit of these two books alongside the other prophetical book of the Bible. That tells us in itself something about the high regard of Daniel and Revelation in this church. Having said this, I would like us to focus a little bit this morning on a few prophets in the Bible in order to see, on the one hand, the effects of having a certain command of prophecy on that person, and on the other hand, a little bit of their, let's say, private life. When you look at the prophets, and that they have access to the true perspective, right? Because they have direct connection to God. You will always see a few, let's say, attitudes or strengths. For example, they have orientation. They know where to go, what to do, what is required of them. They have steadiness, especially during challenges or confrontations. For example, Moses. In the beginning, he's hesitant, as you know. In Exodus 3:11, he says, "Who am I?" Asks God, look for somebody else. And after God exhausts all his arguments, the next chapter, 4:13, he says, "Please send somebody else." But once he accepts the call, he is fearless, even in front of the great Egyptian Pharaoh. Second example, the anonymous man of God, the one who condemns Jeroboam publicly and remains single-minded at any diversion. The king gets sick, gets healed, he invites him for a meal, and he says, "You can give me half of your fortunes and still I won't accept." Another good example, actually two, they are together because they are related to the same adversary. Elijah on the one hand, Micah son of Imlah on the other hand. They both confront Ahab, the vicious king of Israel, and succeed very well to remain faithful even when they are outnumbered. And one example from the New Testament, John the Baptist. He preaches to provincial bystanders in the beginning, a humble beginning, but then feels tremendously free to reprimand the ruthless Antipas. Looking from above, all these prophets look almost invincible, almost. Because when you zoom into their private lives, then you begin seeing some disturbing facts. Moses, for example, fails where he was the strongest. You remember Numbers 12:3? He was the most humble, long-suffering, however we want to translate that Hebrew word. Well, he lost temper once, an earthly Canaan for that matter. The anonymous man of God fails in the highest of his strengths. He makes one exception to his inflexibility. In a parenthesis, This man is very able to apply the word of God to others, but fails or misapplies it to himself. Elijah fails where he was outstanding. He was so valiant in conflict, yet after conflict, fear creeps in his unshrinking character. Jezebel is not even present. She just sends word, and it's enough for him to get so troubled. John the Baptist fails in his greatest achievement. He was the first to recognize Jesus' messiahship, only to doubt it in the darkest hour of his life later. The point that I'm trying to make. In Revelation, the term prophet does not always express the office of a prophet, but also sometimes the role of a herald that speaks for God. In a non-technical sense, we are all prophets. But let's remember that even though we have a certain command of the book of Revelation, the real battle is in our private lives, as it was with these prophets that I gave example about. Revelation in general and chapter 17 in particular requires mind, right? Or understanding. 17:9, Revelation 17:9. When we get solutions or explanations, we might be tempted to suppose that we got that mind or understanding. And this gives us maybe that dauntless attitude. But how many times did we not change our mind about things we thought are right? Sometimes I was thinking of the two witnesses, again, two examples of fearless characters, but they are pictured according to Moses and Elijah. And if I look at Moses and Elijah, I see on the one hand braveness and on the other hand weakness in their own life. If prophets can and do fail, the interpreters of prophecy, all the more so. We gathered here to share our thoughts on Revelation 17 and related matters. While we make our case, let's remember that the true battle is not cognitive, it's spiritual. And that the first enemy is not Pharaoh, is not Jeroboam, is not Ahab, not Jezebel, not Herod. Probably the first enemy is self. And its very efficient ally is sometimes our very strengths. According to Revelation, one can miss the New Jerusalem one of the following ways: by altering its content or by moral failure. I was just wondering, when we interpret, do we add to Revelation or do we cut from Revelation? Is this a dance on wire? About spiritual failure is simpler, because in Revelation this can definitively be solved by the blood of the Lamb. Clothes get whitened in red. Let's cling on Jesus. If we are to overcome, as Revelation 2 and 3 repeatedly invite, we will only be able through Jesus' victory. We overcome because he overcame, and we overcome in him. And if we get other things wrong, let us at least get a correct picture of him, the Savior. May the Lord bless each one of us. Amen.
All right, a little bit of orientation for this program. You have a blue folder, or you just had some sheets that were handed to you. If you open that up, you'll find that there is a a sheet that looks like this. It's got the logo at the top, Revelation Symposium. It's on 2 sides, and it gives you the time frames for our program. The schedule is tight, so we have to kind of make sure that people stay within their time limits, and we have certain timekeepers. We have a group of 5 people who were involved in planning this program. It's been a lot of work, I want to tell you. I'm Tom Shepard, I'm the chair. Then I'd like the other members of the committee to, if they're here, to stand up. Some are probably back someplace. So we have Hugo Leon, Mark LaRose. We have Daniel Gordon over here. We also have Sam Nunez, and Conrad Vine also is working with us. And then back there in the back is Lidvar Anvik. He's worked with us in terms of our getting things, our AV work. So if you have PowerPoints that need to be projected either in the plenary sessions or in the breakout groups, then please let me or one of these people know so that we can make sure that we get you lined up. When we do our cluster groups or breakout sessions, those will all be tomorrow on Friday, so we have a little time today. If you say, oh, I brought a PowerPoint and I didn't send it. Okay, it's all right. We'll work it out, and we'll get it all linked up. What we will do is, in the cluster sessions, the breakout sessions, we'll have all of the PowerPoints on one computer for each session. There's 4 different groups that will be going at the same time, because we have like almost 30 papers that are being presented in this just couple of days. Okay, so if you look at this, the plenary sessions are all today. They're all here in the sanctuary. The breakout sessions or cluster groups are in different rooms, and we'll explain that tomorrow morning, because that's when we'll be doing it. But there's a sheet that you'll have that will help you to get to that. All right, so it's a tight schedule. We have scheduled 2 presentations that are just going to be presentations without question and answer. They're by Dr. Stevanovic and Dr. Kryliak, and they will be presenting first. One is on the history of the development of interpretation of Revelation 17. The other is on Ellen White and Revelation 17. Then we have a little break, and then we go into our regular plenary presentations. Those plenary presentations go like this: 30 minutes of presentation, then 20 minutes for Q&A. We'll have microphones that will be carried around, because this is all being projected or live streamed, so people will be able to ask questions. I remember Dr. Bill Shea, who was one of the directors of the Biblical Research Institute at the General Conference. He told me one time that he had 2 file drawers full of people's explanations of Revelation 17, verses 9 to 11 in particular. 2 file drawers full. So don't be surprised that we will not necessarily all agree on everything on this. We agree to disagree, but to be agreeable, okay? We ask that you not make any personal attacks, and when you ask a question, please ask a question, don't make a speech. You have an opportunity to make the speech when you give your presentation. But if you want to disagree with a person, think of something that you can ask in a nice way that will, kind of lay out the coursework or lay out the situation where they can respond and say, well, this is how I see it. And you're going to say how you see it when it's your turn to give a presentation. Our meals will be down in the fellowship hall. You go out the main doors here. You go down to the left till you reach a wall. Then you turn left, and it'll be there. Your name tag is your entrance for lunch, okay? And the lunch is provided for our presenters and their spouses if they're here. You got to have your name tag. Let's see, what else did I need to say? Restrooms are, you go out the door, straight out, and there's on either side. There's also some down in the hall. Some of our meetings will be downstairs. The cluster. Two of the cluster groups or breakout sessions will be downstairs. There's a stairway. We'll show you how to get there. There's also an elevator that goes down if you don't like stairs. I think that I've got that pretty well set up. And boy, I'm ahead of schedule. Did I forget something, Daniel? Did you have something you needed to say? Yes, he'll give you he's one of the pastors of the village church, so he'll give you a welcome.
Just to remind, we have our website, villagesda.com. You may actually check this. You have this website in handouts. And if you prefer some electronic versions, they are there. So you may download PDF and use PDF versions of orientation sheet, of the program, and other documents distributed for you. So yes, and please remember, if you see something red, it doesn't relate to Revelation 17. This color is just to draw your attention. If you see something red, it means you can ask questions related to maybe some technical issues or even transportation. If you see a blue background, this means these people are local from this church, and you may ask questions related to how to get here or there, or maybe some, other help, all right?
All right, so Daniel and I are the two people to contact if you have any problems, any emergencies. Our phone numbers are also listed on the sheet. They're at the bottom of the orientation sheet, which is in your folder, okay? So the orientation sheet tells you where restrooms are, tells you where the fellowship hall is, where the breakout rooms or cluster groups will meet, and we'll explain those more tomorrow. We also have a sheet that was handed out to you that gives you the schedule for the cluster meetings, the breakout rooms tomorrow, because you might want to choose particular ones to go to and hear them. And so we have a whole lot of different presentations that will be made. I think that's some of the website is listed there as well. Now there's two different websites. The website of Revelation17prophecy.com is the website where you can download all the papers. All the papers are listed there, and there's also the schedule listed there. But the Village Church website has the 200-word summaries of all the papers. So they're abstracts that are there on the Village website. So you can go there and see the abstracts if you don't want to read. Some papers are a little long, and so you might want to just read the abstract and decide which papers you want to go and to see. All right. Now, I don't know if there's any questions that you have. If you do, just ask us as we go along, and the Lord will bless, and we'll continue with our program. So I think we are in good shape because we have a little extra time. That doesn't hurt. Typically, we will let you know if you're going too long. And what will happen is, first we show you a little sign that says 5 minutes. Then we show you a little sign that says 2 minutes. And then the person that's in charge will stand up and probably come up and stand next to you. And then you'll know that you need to finish, right? So, but all good fun. We're glad that you're all here, and there will be others who will be joining us as we go along. We have programs today, all day tomorrow, and even on Sabbath we have both services. We have Sabbath school panel, we have a Sabbath afternoon program, another panel. So we got a lot to go in the next 3 days. All right. So this time we're going to have our first presentation, and that's by Dr. Ranko Stevanovic. He is one of the professors of New Testament over at the seminary, my colleague. I'm a senior research professor there, which means I'm old and officially retired. But I think I don't know, he might be a little younger than me, but not much. He's going to talk about the history of the development of the interpretation of Revelation 17 at this time. Ranko.
Good morning, everyone. When my friend Tom Shepard contacted me not too long ago, asking for these introductory presentations, I was very, very hesitant, especially when he mentioned the topic. And he already introduced the problem. Dr. Shea, how many files of interpretations of Revelation 17? And let me tell you, it was a struggle with me. Second struggle that I had, it was 3 weeks ago, I came back from Europe, found my wife sick with terrible cough. Few days after that, the cough started with me. Just few hours sleep every night. And when Tom contacted me day before yesterday, I offered him not to come and to make the presentation because I'm afraid during my classes I have to ask students to wait for a few minutes. I leave the classroom to cough and to come back and to continue. So thank you for your understanding with regard to that. Even my brain has been impacted significantly. It was not COVID, but popular flu that spreads around. The history of the interpretation of Revelation 17. By the way, I just noticed the title. It says within Adventism. I understood in general. Because if we understand what is going outside of the church, we can also understand what is going on within the church. You will see sometimes the same methods, only different names are. As we read Revelation 17, we know very well that John had the invitation to observe the judgment of a great prostitute. And she was sitting on many waters. That's what John heard. He did not see it. When in verse 3, John is taken to the wilderness to see the prostitute, he was surprised. She was not on many waters. She was sitting on the beast. So do you see, we already have here a problem, two different symbols. Then John describes this woman. And one enigmatic text that is found in the whole vision was that John was, as literal reading of the Greek text states, he was amazed with the great amazement. This is the only time in the book of Revelation that John is amazed. He was not amazed when he saw the dragon, when he saw other entities in the book of Revelation. The question is why? And the angel explains to him that he will explain to him the mystery of this woman and the mystery of the beast. What is that so much mysterious about these two entities? And the scholars throughout the history have been struggling with that issue. Just enough to say that every generation tried to apply Revelation 17 to their circumstances and the time in which they lived. So also today. So then what are the issues that people have been struggling? Number one, who was that woman that John saw in the vision? What did the scarlet beast represent or symbolized? And of course, number three, what are those 7 heads of the beast? These are actually 3 key issues. Maybe the 4th one should be added. What is the meaning of those 10 horns that will support the beast and the woman? And the Christians, as I mentioned, were struggled significantly. By the way, as you notice that every time when we have a change in Vatican, the spirits are stirred up. Suddenly, this becomes a topic that is preached about from the pulpit. And I still remember when Benedict resigned and Francis took the papal throne. I never received in my life so many invitations and calls and questions from all continents about that. By the way, I thought it was only about me, then I realized that BRI General Conference was bombarded with those questions. And finally, Ministry Magazine invited me to say, can you put quickly an article for Ministry Magazine that we give the official position to the church. The church does not have an official position. But at least, what is our current understanding of that? And that article was published in Ministry Magazine December 2013. Okay, and if you are interested to see, because I will not have a chance to make presentation of that you can at least see my position. But I will take the last few minutes to tell you the struggles that I had in dealing with this chapter. So let's go to our modern times. I would just take a few minutes to see what is going on outside of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. By the way, the interpretation of chapter 17 goes around those different interpretative approaches to the book of Revelation. And I will start with preterist. Usually, preterist and idolist views somehow are dissonant, even though there are many points of agreement. But in this case, I put preterist and idolist together. And there are two basic views. What is common is that the woman is Rome. And probably David Auni is a proponent of that view. Others, they follow him. They said because the evidences for that is from De Roma, goddess De Roma, that appears on the coins in the first century, that really contributed to this image of the woman that was sitting on the beast, because she was the female personification of Rome. There is another view, and probably Josephine Ford is the originator of that view. It's actually the unfaithful Jerusalem. But generally, preterists, they agree that the beast is the Roman Empire. You can see that we already see that people are struggling how to interpret the symbol, not of the whole book of Revelation, but in this case, in chapter 17. In contrast, we are talking about the futurist view. While preterists, they try to see all the relevance of the book of Revelation and meaning Revelation in the context of the first century, the futurists go to completely other side of the line. They put everything in the future. So the woman is the apostate church in adulterous relationships with the world of political power. And Thomas and Ladd and Patterson and others, they have different variations of those views. Everything for them is vague because this belongs to the time of the end. But basically they agree what is that. The beast is the political entity, political powers, telling us that religion will rely on the political powers. That's futuristic views. So the beast was, is not, and is to come. There are two lines of interpretation among preterists. One is historicist. It's Nero. Nero, the religious view, who died, and that there was a view, even among Christians, that he will resurrect again. And many scholars, they say, here, Nero really reappeared in the view of Christians in the person of Domitian, who came. But there are others, they said, no, we cannot do historical, it's symbolic, because the beast is a negative counterpart of God. For instance, Aoni is probably the key person, and others, they follow him. In futurist view, most of futurists hold that this is the reference to the beast in Revelation 13:3. The beast that was active for a certain period of time, 42 months, received deadly wound, and the beast appeared again on the scene. And of course, then another interpretive issue was the 7 heads of the beast. In the preterist interpretation, the 7 mountains that are mentioned are the 7 hills as the reference to Rome. And now comes, again, double interpretation. By the way, you will see 3 different interpretations. One is the historical interpretations. What preterists do, they said 7 heads are succession of 7 Roman emperors. What is the issue? I have the list here of the Roman emperors. How many are of them? More than 13 of them. Where to start? Which emperors? Probably we can learn the lesson is when people have some ideas already, they try to fit that idea in their interpretation. Some argue Julius Caesar is the first one. We should start with him. Others, they said, no, Augustus. But which one is the 7th one? In order to get 7-1, they have to take some emperors who reign for a short time. They had to take out of the list in order to make the emperor really that fits the interpretation. Sorry, I don't want to talk too much about that. But for most of them, the one that is, it's Domitian of the time of the writing of the book of Revelation. Others, they say, no, historical does not work. The same who follow that approach, they said, no, this is something that should be interpreted symbolically. And they interpret the whole vision in symbolic way. Others, like Auni, for instance, they said, yeah, it is historical, but he takes also the second approach, symbolic, to make the final interpretation of that. And then, of course, the futurist approach is they reject the preterist view completely. And they said the 7 heads are not personal rulers. They are the kingdom who oppressed and persecuted God's people throughout the history. And almost all of them, they agree. You should start with Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, and Greece. Which one is the 6th one? Which one is the 7th one? Here, actually, disagreement begins. So the futurists are very divided on the meaning, special way on the 8th head. Some future world kingdom or political leader in the future. You can see inconsistency. Some futurists like Michaels, Johnston, Fleming hold the preterist view as the 5 that were fallen, according to John in Revelation 17. This is just, in the general sense, what is going on in scholarship today. And maybe we will realize why this is important for us to understand. So now we are turning to interpretation of Revelation 17 within the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Of course, where should we start? With the first commentary that was introduced within Seventh-day Adventist Church, Uriah Smith. I must tell you, even last night, for I don't know how many times, I read Uriah Smith trying to figure out what he's saying. Usually Uriah Smith's interpretation is with long quotations from the contemporary interpreters of the book. But when he comes here, he was struggling. So let me just provide a brief summary of Uriah Smith. The woman is the church, not any church. It's Roman Catholic Church sitting on the beast, which is the civil power. The 7 heads are explained to be first as the 7 mountains, and then the 7 kings. Yet he does not interpret the kings as individual kings, but evidently it's like kingdoms. So the 7 heads Unfortunately, he fails to identify this is not important for Uriah Smith. Because the text says they are past. So we don't need to deal with that. For Uriah Smith, it was very important is that the 7 heads are 7 phases through which the beast passed. But the 8th head, this is what raised concern of Uriah Smith, is one of the 7, and according to him, it is this one we are interested to follow, not other heads. It is the papal power that grew out of and succeeded pagan Rome in chapter 13. So that's actually all interpretation is found on one page of his commentary. I'm sorry, I'm jumping from Uriah Smith now to modern times. If sometimes I mention the names, it's never for negative reasons, just that we see what is going on. I'm coming to Alberto Treyer. We interacted for a long time, and recently he put everything in a great volume that he distributed many of us who are even sitting here. Actually, he almost repeats Uriah Smith in every concept and interpretation that Uriah Smith had. That book is self-published, but follows Uriah Smith closely. The prostitute is Roman Catholic Church, the papal Rome. Her adornment and splendor represents the pomp of the Roman Catholic Church as the end-time Babylon. The 7 mountains are the literal hills, yet they also symbolize the successive history of all empires. You can see a little bit similarity what we already talked outside of Seventh-day Church. Of the war that arose against the kingdom of God upon which the city harlot Roman Catholic Church is seated. And now, this is in quote what he states, very similar to Uriah Smith. We don't need to consider all the empires of the world to determine which empire should begin the 7 empires. He even does not make any attempt to interpret those 7 heads of the beast. The number 7 means something complete, and the emphasis is placed on the last 3. Which are the last 3? Is the 5th one for him, that's the papal authority of Revelation 13, 1-10. It's a secular, number 6 is secular atheistic France, and the 7th one is Protestant United States when speaks like a dragon. And the 8th one is resurrected papal Rome. You can see really this is the revival of Uriah Smith's view in many ways. Now we are coming to Seventh-day Adventist Bible commentary. For me, that was the most difficult always to read. The woman is mystical Babylon without actually identifying it, as usually it is done in the traditional Adventist interpretation. But it is a symbol of organized religious opposition to God and his people. The beast is the symbol of political powers. So when you have the woman sitting on the beast, you have already the interpretation. What about 7 heads? Seventh-day Adventist Bible commentary does not take any stand or any position. They include what was going on among Seventh-day Adventists, but there is no anything as a suggestion what it could be. And now finally, because of all that mess, I cannot go to individual interpretation of chapter 17, but it was in 1980s as Jena Conference established a committee known as DARCOM, Daniel Revelation Committee. I know probably at least one person here among us is Dr. Pauline. He was a part of that committee. Dr. Pauline, when you have presentation, please correct me in any way if I misinterpret everything what is going on. What I just read, there is not too much discussion on chapter 17. There is one special chapter that is done, actually to show how preterism was wrong. That's the main point. There are few sentences, the conclusion. The sea beast of Revelation 13 applies to the Roman Catholic Church, and the earth beast appears on the war scene after the mortal wound has been healed. All they did was to distance themselves from the preterist interpretation of the seven heads and the Nero Redivivus myth and Domitian to be a reincarnation of Nero. The seven mountains are a symbol for nations of empires, not individual rulers. So what comes from Darkham is that we are not dealing with those seven kings as individual rulers. They must be the empires or kingdom. This is probably something that Darkham clearly communicated. So what is now the situation? We have to understand, because I believe all the papers that will be presented here will deal with one or another issue is. I will first start with the popular interpretation. I have been Seventh-day Adventist the whole my life. And I don't want to tell you about number of preaching and presentations that I had opportunity, number one, to hear as a church member, as a young person from the pulpit that was preached, and also as a pastor, at a ministerial meeting. People will be invited from general conference, from the division, sometimes the scholars. And really was always, I had to listen some conflicting issues. Everything is wrong. This one that I present, actually, it's correct. Which actually did something for me, to distance myself from the book of Revelation, even though as a pastor, I had, during my 18 years of pastoral ministry, many evangelistic series, and of course, the church asked me to preach on the book of Revelation. But the confusion stayed within me. With that confusion, actually, I came to Seventh-day Adventist Theological Seminary. And my intention was never to go in the book of Revelation. I wanted to go to Judaism. And Dr. Pauline, I hope he still remembers instance, actually, how I changed my mind. So, what is the popular preaching on Revelation 17 and popular interpretation? Let me just summarize, and I will add here a few details. Is that the prostitute is the Roman Catholic Church, and her daughters are the Protestant churches. And really, the person who put it clearly in writing, I'm talking about what's preached from the pulpit and what people were talking about. But the first person, in my view, maybe I'm wrong, who put in writing was Dr. Mervyn Maxwell. This is exactly what you can find in his book, God Cares, Volume 2. But the beast is either papacy, in that popular interpretation, or political authorities. You have two lines of interpretation. And there is something very interesting. Please, I would like what we are talking here that you compare with the preterist interpretation that we mentioned. You can see almost a replica of that. The seven mountains are literal mountains, and preterists will say amen. And there is reason for that. That there are seven hills upon which Rome was built. While in preterism, those seven kings are seven Roman emperors. In the popular interpretation, there is a switch a little bit. They're not rulers. They are seven popes. And please just allow me a little bit to summarize that we understand what's going on is. Which seven popes? The idea is dealing with the question, what is the beast of Revelation 17? And in my view, the conclusion is the right one. It's the beast of chapter 13, after the healing of the deadly wound. Okay? We agree with that. But then there is a question. Has the deadly wound been healed? The answer is yes. When? The answer is with the Lateran Treaty in the year 1929, when finally Roman Catholic Church got back Vatican. So now, the things are very, very simple. Since the healing of the deadly wound in that interpretation, there will be 7 popes. The 6th one in the original interpretation was to be the last one, and the 7th one actually would be the last one. You can see here the interpretation, would be the last one. In what way, how the way, people were very, very much divided in interpreting it. So, when I was young, I remember the idea was that John Paul II was the 6th one. And the belief was that he was actually that last pope. And there are few instances that really were attached to John Paul. You remember that there was the assassination attempt on him. So the beast became wounded. Eventually the beast would die, but it will resurrect. And I remember when John Paul II died, among Adventists, I listened so much about that. Actually, he is somewhere, but he will resurrect in order for the final events to be realized. Finally, people really realize the real situation with him. So the next pope became the last one. Of course, it was not realized, but always somebody, one from the list had to be taken out every time in order to make 7. Then Francis was the last one. Now we have the 4th last pope before the second coming of Christ. This is the situation. And friends, this is not really to laugh. People are struggling with that view. They struggled with that view. So what is the issue with that? There are a few things that we have to understand. One is that the apocalyptic prophecy does not deal with individual rulers or individual entities. It deals always with systems and institutions. And this is indicated in chapter 17. The angel explains to John that those 7 heads are 7 mountains. These are not literal mountains because in the apocalyptic prophecy, it's a symbol. And the angel indicates immediately, depends how you read the Greek text. The Greek text originally said, there are 7 mountains and they are 7 kings, which is really a continuation, clarification, what those mountains are. The question is which kings? If we go to the apocalyptic prophecy, especially the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation, the kings, it's always the word used for kingdoms. You can see in Daniel 2, when Daniel appeared before Nebuchadnezzar to interpret, you remember those 4 kingdoms, he said, the head of gold, you are the king. And after you, there'll be another kingdom. We know that after Nebuchadnezzar, there was no another kingdom. There are 4 other kings in Babylon. But when he said you, it meant Babylon, and we rightly interpret Babylon. If you go to chapter 7 of the book of Daniel, verse 17, it talks about those 4 kingdoms as the 4 kings, as the angel explains to Daniel. And we know that these are not individual kings. They are kingdoms. That's the major issue that we have with these interpretive views. Maybe somebody will provide some evidence and that this view is correct and that the view is justified. But for now, this is a very, very serious issue with regard to interpretation of that. And especially if you want to find the seventh one, there is always elimination of some people. When Benedict assumed his position, there was interpretation because this is the fulfillment of the prophecy that this one will stay for a little while. And he was only for 8 years. What to say about John Paul, who was only for 1 month? He was a ruler. So I hope that we understand the issue, and maybe this will be something that we'll be struggling during this conference. Okay. So the wounded head that is healed is said to refer to John Paul's second assassination attempt in 1981. That's the popular view. What is going on now among Adventist scholars? And let me tell you, it's not an easy task. Because if you see on the book of Daniel how much writings we have on the book of Daniel, how many commentaries we have. On the book of Revelation, not too many. So you have to go either to YouTube or to know people personally in order to understand what is a common trend among Seventh-day Adventists. But among Adventists who follow that trend, there are two lines of interpretation. The first view is based on the understanding that when John was confused what he saw in those first verses of Revelation, the angel explains to him especially those 7 heads, okay? And the understanding is that the angel explains to John the vision from the end time point. If you see those 7 heads as 7 kings, everybody agrees that the key in defining those 7 heads, it's actually the 6th one which is the present tense. Now the question is, in what time point you put that is. And according to this first line of interpretation, it's from the point of the time of the end. Which point of the time of the end? And there is great disagreement. But the agreement is that those 5 kingdoms, so there is agreement, they are kingdoms, not individual personalities. They must begin with Babylon as mentioned in the book of Daniel. There is almost common agreement with that. The problem comes, it's about the 6th and the 7th one, especially the 8th one. And there are as many interpretations as the interpreters who are making those suggestions. That's the problem. On the other side, Seventh-day Adventist scholars, I belong to that group. They show that we are dealing here with prostitute Babylon that's represented by these women. It is the apostate religious system as the union of the dragon, the sea beast, and the earth beast. And her daughters are other apostate religion. So the beast refers to the political support to Babylon at the time of the end. Most likely the 10 horns, a short-lived end-time political confederacy, will put ourselves in the service of Babylon. There's some suggestion, actually, in this same place, we had a conference on the book of Revelation. Dr. Paulin, I don't know how many years, was it 7, 8 years ago that we attended? And it is for the first time that Eckhart Miller suggested something that actually he presented new interpretation that I had to respond to him, and I was very much confused that actually the beast was Satan himself. I don't know if you still remember, I had to respond to him 10 minutes. I completely disagree. I said, Satan is never beast in the book of Revelation. He's the dragon. By the way, it took some time, you know. We have to become mature. And I saw great light in that. I still believe the expression that he used was not something that I would agree. I say that beast is a satanic system that Satan used throughout the history. He used at the time of Israel, okay, at Sinai there. At that time, the satanic system worked through Egypt, so the beast was Egypt. At the time of Daniel, it was Babylon, because it worked through the head of Babylon. And of course, when you're dealing with medieval period, that satanic system worked through one of the head during medieval period. And the beast, this is what the beast was about. This is actually the situation today. I'm sorry, the time flies very, very fast. It's situation with Seventh-day Adventist Church. There are a few other individual interpretations I don't have time to mention. But since I have 2 minutes, can I steal 1 minute? My personal struggle with Revelation 17. Can I just go quickly to present to you? Something that bothers me always was Revelation 12:17, that points that really the major player is not any institution, is not any system, it's Satan himself, but he's using institutions and systems. But what bothered me so much, why Satan is so much angry at the woman. But he's not going to wage war against the woman. He's going to wage war against the remnant of the woman's offspring. And I struggled a lot. And I just want to tell you a person who helped me in understanding that. Her name is Ellen White, in Great Controversy. I understood that this prostitute woman in chapter 17 is actually the woman of chapter 12, who at the time of the end will find itself on the wrong side. Ellen White a lot has to say about that in Great Controversy. She made Protestantism, that in the past was faithful to God, God used for his cause. But the time of the end, with the false doctrine, will be on the wrong side. And for me, this explains the reason why John was so much amazed with great amazement when he saw that woman. And when angel stated to John, John, I will explain to you the mystery of this woman. There is something about that mystery, and I hope that some of you will address that issue, that mystery of that woman in your paper and presentations. But I believe that that view really affirms a Seventh-day Adventist understanding of the remnant that we Seventh-day Adventists hold at high point. The time of the end, the entities that were in the past faithful to God according to the book of Revelation will find themselves on the wrong side. But God at that time will have the remaining ones of the Christian church that in the past was faithful to God, who will really find themselves faithful at the time of the end and be on God's side. And it's through them God will accomplish what he intended to do in this world. I'm sorry, there is much more to be said, but I hope that my brief presentation will give you in a nutshell what actually the issues are, and I'm so eager to listen to your presentations today and tomorrow and on Sabbath day. May God bless you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Stevanovic. I was reminded by one of my colleagues that before Dr. Stevanovic's presentation, we were to have a season of prayer. So that was my mistake. It's always good to admit when you're wrong. And I think we'll do that now, praying over what he said, but also what's coming ahead. We invite you to break into little groups, and we'll pray for just a few minutes together. And then I will close with prayer, and then we'll go on to our next presentation. So we'll give a few minutes to pray, and pray for God's success and for light in these meetings. Let us pray. Father in heaven, we thank you for this season of prayer, this time to think about our own petitions to you for light and for your grace to guide us as we study, as we hear different presentations, as we ask questions and go back and forth. Pray for your Spirit to be with us throughout this time. In Jesus' name, amen. Our next presenter is Dr. Bohan Kurliak. He is a researcher at the E.G. White Adventist Center at Andrews University. And his presentation is to present to us on Ellen White on Revelation 17. A paper has been handed to you, which I think is a copy of his paper, and he's going to give his presentation at this time. Thank you, Dr. Kurliak.
Good morning, everyone. It's a great honor to be here and to have the opportunity to present my research. The topic of my study is Interpretation of Revelation 17 in the Writings of Ellen G. White. Introduction. Revelation 17 is one of the most debated chapters in the book of Revelation. Symbols such as Babylon the Great, the Scarlet Beast, and the King of the Earth have often been interpreted in the connection with the concept of the Antichrist. Although the apocalypse has attracted particular attention in Adventist scholarship since the very beginning of the church history, discussions regarding Revelation 17 are still ongoing. In the writings of Ellen G. White, while not a comprehensive commentary on the biblical text, nevertheless hold considerable authority within Adventism. Moreover, since Ellen G. White was one of the founders and early pioneers of the Adventist Church, her perspective on Revelation 17 also carries historical value, which underscores the relevance of the present study. To the best of my knowledge, however, there is only one scholarly publication dealing specifically with her interpretation of Revelation 17. Don Leo Garilva published an article titled The Development of Ellen G. White's Concept of Babylon in the Great Controversy in the Journal of the Adventist Theological Society. In this article, Garilva traces the development of Ellen G. White's concept of Babylon across the 4 editions of the Great Controversy and compares her view with that of her contemporaries as well as with modern scholars. Despite its scholarly contribution and value, the article has certain limitations. Garilva focuses on the concept of Babylon, while other symbols of Revelation 17 remain unexplored. Furthermore, the author largely limits his analysis to the Great Controversy, neglecting other relevant sources. Ellen G. White's interpretation of Revelation 17 appears in various Adventist commentaries on the book of Revelation. However, these treatments are typically compilations of quotations from White that lack detailed analysis or offer only very limited and superficial commentary. Questions that remain open or insufficiently explored include: first, how did Ellen G. White interpret the image of Revelation 17? Second, which verses of Revelation 17 did she quote or allude to? And third, what arguments did she employ to justify her position? Accordingly, the aim of this article is to identify the distinctive features of the interpretation of Revelation 17 in Ellen G. White's writings. To achieve this aim, the study will pursue the following specific objectives. First, determine which symbols from Revelation 17 White commented on. Second, analyze White's argumentation and highlight its distinctive traits. Third, elucidate the theological significance of the symbols of Revelation 17 in her writings. And fourth, identify White's hermeneutical approaches and the temporal framework of her interpretation of Revelation 17. The analysis of symbols in Wright's writing will generally follow the sequence in which they appear in Revelation 17. The study begins with one of the chapter's principal symbols, the harlot Babylon and the scarlet beast, then examines the harlot's daughter, the wine of Babylon, the universal coalition, the connection between Babylon and the beast image in Revelation 13, and finally, the symbol of waters, harlot and the scarlet beast. The main commentary on Revelation 17 by Ellen G. White appears in her interpretation of the three angels' messages in Revelation 14 from 6 to 12. Speaking about the very term Babylon, she writes, "The term Babylon is derived from Babel and signifies confusion. It is employed in Scripture to designate the various forms of false or apostate religion. In Revelation 17, Babylon is represented as a woman, a figure which is used in the Bible as a symbol of a church, a virtuous woman representing a pure church, a vile woman, an apostate church." First, Ellen G. White approaches the concept of Babylon within the broad context of the entire Bible. She asserts that in the Bible, Babylon signifies confusion, a meaning that reaches back to Genesis 11, where at the Tower of Babel, confusion of languages occurred as an expression of rebellion against God. White maintains that Babylon in the Bible symbolizes the various forms of false or apostate religion. Thus, for her, the primary dimension of Babylon concept is the religious rather than political. In a broad sense, Babylon encompasses any false religion that contradicts divine truth. White then narrows her focus to Revelation 17 and claims that John here writes about a false church. In her view, the woman of Revelation 17 represents a specific religion, Christianity in its apostate and corrupted form. The phrase, a virtuous woman representing a pure church, a vile woman, an apostate church, may suggest an intentional contrast between the woman in Revelation 12 and the harlot in Revelation 17. Ellen G. White then proceeds to biblical argument in support of her view that the woman symbolizes the church which has entered into a covenantal union with God. She writes, "In the Bible, the sacred and enduring character of the relations that exist between Christ and his church is represented by the union of marriage. The Lord has joined his people to himself by a solemn covenant. He promising to be their God, and they pledging themselves to be his and his alone." White explicitly identifies the marriage metaphor as a means of portraying the secret and enduring bond between Christ and his church, emphasizing both divine initiative, God promises to be their God, and human response, the people pledge to belong to him. To substantiate this point, she cites texts from both the Old and the New Testaments. According to White, such a relationship is a moral and spiritual reality. If God's people turn away from him, this is not merely a matter of religious compromise, but a violation of the marriage covenant. In this sense, unfaithfulness becomes a form of spiritual adultery. To support this point, White again draws on both Old and New Testament texts. Thus, White consistently constructs a coherent biblical picture from the prophetic text of the Old Testament, where God appears as a husband calling his people to faithfulness, to the New Testament, where Christ is the bridegroom and the church is bride. The faithfulness of God's people corresponds to the loyalty of a wife to her husband, while their apostasy is portrayed as a spiritual adultery. Next, Ellen G. White turns to the question of historical identification. She cites several verses from the 17th chapter of Revelation, verses from 4 to 6 and 18, and then comments. The power that for so many centuries maintained despotic sway over the monarchs of Christendom is Rome. Here, Ellen G. White employs a historicist hermeneutical approach, arguing that John was not writing about a pagan Rome of the first century, but about Christian Rome, The phrase many centuries indicates that she interprets the harlot Babylon in Revelation 17 within the context of the long history of the church, when Christianity functioned as a state religion and exercised control over political authority. This is further confirmed by her statement about the monarchs of Christendom, who, according to her, were under Rome's dominion. It also becomes clear that for Ellen G. White, the scarlet beast on which the woman sits in Revelation 17:3 symbolizes the political power that the church employed to achieve its purposes. In addition, she offers further arguments to support of identifying the harlot with the papacy. First, White draws attention to the characteristic of wealth. She writes, "The purple and scarlet color, the gold and precious stones and pearls, vividly pictures the magnificence and more than kingly pomp affected by the haughty see of Rome." Ellen G. White interprets the external description of the harlot in Revelation 17 as representing the arrogance, royal splendor, and grandeur of the Catholic Church. She employs the polemical expression, the haughty see of Rome, which explicitly points to Christian Rome. Second, White highlights the violent nature of the harlot. And no other power could be so truly declared, drunken with the blood of the saints, Revelation 17:6, as the church which has so cruelly persecuted the followers of Christ. Here, she clearly refers to the persecution of believers by the Catholic Church over many centuries, a theme Ellen G. White addressed repeatedly in her writings. In her view, this description of the woman as drunken with the blood of the saints unmistakably points to the papacy. Third, White emphasizes the woman's alliance with the state. Babylon is also charged with the sin of unlawful connection with the kings of the earth, Revelation 17:2. It was by departure from the Lord and alliance with the heathen that the Jewish church became a harlot, and Rome, corrupting herself in like manner by seeking the support of worldly powers, receives a like condemnation. End quote. Here, Ellen G. White uses the apostasy of Jerusalem as an Old Testament example. The Jewish church turned away from God, entered into alliances with pagan political powers, and the result became a harlot. In the same way, Christian Rome, through its union with secular authority, likewise fell into apostasy. White cites the phrase, the kings of the earth, Revelation 17:2, and interprets it broadly as worldly powers. This suggests that she understood the kings to symbolize the political forces of this world. Thus, the history of God's people falling into apostasy is repeated. Hence, the analysis shows that Ellen G. White interprets the woman Babylon in Revelation 17 as the apostate church, namely Christian Rome, and the scarlet beast as the political power controlled by the church. She uses the term Babylon to refer to the papacy and locates the primary fulfillment of this prophecy in the past, during the centuries when papal Rome oppressed God's true remnant. Daughter of the harlot. In her interpretation of Revelation 17, Ellen G. White does not restrict Babylon solely to Rome, but broadens the concept. She writes, Babylon is said to be the mother of the harlot, Revelation 17:5. By her daughters must be symbolized churches that cling to her doctrines and traditions and follow her example of sanctifying the truth, sacrificing the truth and the approval of God in order to form an unlawful alliance with the world. This description suggests that the image of Babylon encompasses not only the Catholic Church, but also Protestant communities, which in White's view have followed a similar path of compromise. Thus, she states, the fallen denominational churches are Babylon. White identifies the main features of this resemblance in two elements. First, the adoption of Catholic doctrines and traditions, and establishment of alliance with civil authority. And second, the establishment of alliance with the civil authority. White emphasizes the universal scope of the symbol. In the 17th of Revelation is foretold the destruction of all the churches who corrupt themselves by idolatrous devotion to the service of the papacy, those who have drunk of the wine of the wrath of your fornication. Here she stresses the predictive character of Revelation 17. Thus, in her reading, Babylon functions as a symbol of a broader religious political alliance, in which Catholicism plays the leading role, but which also includes Protestant denominations that, in her judgment, have abandoned their original fidelity to biblical principles. White concludes, many of the Protestant churches are following Rome's example of iniquitous connection with the kings of the earth, the state churches, by their relation to secular government and other denominations, by seeking the favor of the world, and the term Babylon, confusion, may be appropriately applied to these bodies, all professing to derive their doctrines from the Bible, yet divided into almost innumerable sects with widely conflicting creeds and theories. Here, White cites for the second time the phrase found in Revelation 17, the kings of the earth. As before, she interprets it as a reference to political power, using designations such as the state, churches, and secular governments. She then proceeds to identify additional features of Rome that can also be traced in the Protestant churches: veneration of saints, anti-Christian spirit and practices, incomplete separation from Rome, and many, many others. Full list you can find in the paper. Accordingly, Ellen G. White does not limit herself to her own observations or arguments, but constructs her case on the basis of a broad range of authorities from diverse confessional and cultural contexts. This method lends her exposition both universality and weight. The analysis shows that Ellen G. White also applies the term Babylon to the Protestant churches. Thus, for her, Babylon is equal to the papacy and Babylon is equal to the Protestant churches. White does not view this terminology as contradictory or imprecise. The apparent contradiction is easily resolved by her distinction between the image of the mother, the papacy, and that of the daughters, Protestantism. Wine of Babylon. Ellen G. White also offers an interpretation of the wine of Babylon. While she cites Revelation 14:8 and 18:3, there are also allusions to Revelation 17, whereas the wine of Babylon is likewise mentioned. For White, the wine primarily symbolizes false teachings that contradict the Bible. She writes, Babylon has been fostering poisonous doctrines, the wine of error. This wine of error is made up of false doctrines, such as the natural immortality of the soul, the eternal torment of the wicked, the denial of the pre-existence of Christ prior to his birth in Bethlehem, and advocating and exalting the first day of the week above God's holy, sanctified day. For White, then, the wine functions as a symbol of heresies, which, in her understanding, are contrary to biblical truth. Her use of the metaphor poisonous doctrines lends particular intensity to the description. Doctrinal errors are presented not merely as mistaken or unreliable ideas, but as dangerous, fatally harmful to the spiritual life of the believer. Thus, in this context, the wine takes a destructive dimension, poisoning the mind of the leading one way from the truth. White specifies the content of this wine through a list of doctrines. The idea of the natural immortality of the soul, the concept of the eternal torment of the wicked, the denial of Christ's pre-existence prior to his incarnation, and exaltation of the first day of the week over the Sabbath. Elsewhere, White added postmillennialism to the catalog of false teachings. Although Ellen G. White spoke of various false teachings that constitute the wine of Babylon, she most frequently emphasized the exaltation of the first day of the week. She directly connects this with the activity of the man of sin, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, who dared to alter God's law. She writes, "All nations have been made drunk by partaking of the wine of Babylon, by accepting the presumptuous work of the man of sin, who has tampered with the law of God and thought to change the precepts of Jehovah." From this perspective, the wine of Babylon is directly linked with the replacement of the biblical Sabbath by Sunday, a change which, according to White, was accepted not only by the Roman Church, but also by Protestant communities. In addition, White identified the doctrine of the immortality of the soul as a particularly dangerous teaching, one that paves the way for spiritualism and deception. White associates the image of the wine of the wrath with aggression and violence. She writes, "It is a wrath which is created by false doctrines. And when kings and presidents drink this wine of the wrath of your fornication, they are stirred with anger against those who will not come into harmony with the false and satanic heresies, which exalt the false Sabbath, and lead men to trample underfoot God's memorial." Ellen G. White underscores the connection between ideology, false teaching, and practice, violence. Thus, wine is not merely a symbol of distorted teaching, but a force that incites repressive actions against those who uphold God's commandments. It is important to note that in interpreting the temporal dimension of Babylon's wine, Ellen G. White does not limit it to the past, the emergence of the false doctrines in church history, or to present, Protestant churches adopting papal errors, but also extends it to the future. According to White, the devil has a plan to unite the entire world around Sunday observance. Thus, in White's interpretation, the wine of Babylon has a sustained effect. It poisons the past, it is operative in the present, and will reveal its most dangerous power in the future. Universal union. Ellen G. White also comments on the eschatological events described in Revelation 17 from 13 to 14. She does so within a broader theme of the great eschatological conflict, which will divide humanity into two classes, those obedient to God and those disobedient to Him. This conflict, she emphasizes, will involve the entire world. Every nation will be involved. Quote in Revelation 17, from 13 to 14, White first comments on the phrase, "These have one mind," writing, "There will be a universal bond of union, one great harmony, a confederacy of Satan's forces." Here, an eschatological perspective is evident. The passage refers to the final events when various political and religious powers that may appear divided today will ultimately unite. White comments on the symbol of the 10 horns from Revelation 17, particularly the words concerning their future actions. She cites the phrase, "and shall give their power and strength unto the beast," and she writes, "Thus is manifested the same arbitrary oppressive power against religious liberty, freedom to worship of God according to the dictates of conscience, as was manifested by the papacy, when in the past it persecuted those who dared to refuse to conform with the religious rites and ceremonies of Romanism. In the warfare to be waged in the last days, there will be united in opposition to God's people all the corrupt powers that have apostatized from allegiance to the law of Jehovah. In this warfare, the Sabbath of the fourth commandment will be the great point at issue. For in the Sabbath commandment, the great lawgiver identifies himself as the creator of the heavens and the earth. This passage plays a key role in clarifying White's eschatological outlook, as it contains several noteworthy theological emphases. First, White draws an analogy between past persecutions under papal authority and future events. Just as in the Middle Ages the Catholic Church exercised arbitrary oppressive power against those who disagreed with its teaching and rites, so in the last days a similar spirit of intolerance and religious coercion will again emerge. Second, the central issue is not merely theological debate, but the question of freedom of conscience. Third, White does not provide a precise identification of the alliance of the 10 horns with the beast, but writes in general terms that it will be a coalition of apostate powers. All corrupt powers that have apostatized will unite. This appears to point to a global confederation of religious and political structures manifested in the rejection of God's law. Fourth, White singles out the fourth commandment as the great point at issue. This is not merely a dispute over the day of worship, but the symbolic center of the struggle, whether to accept or reject the authority of God's law and God himself as creator. Babylon and the image of the beast. The features of Ellen G. White's interpretation of Babylon in Revelation 17 resemble her interpretation of the beast's image in Revelation 13. Quote in Revelation 17 from 1 to 4, White writes, "Thus is represented the papal power, which with all deceitfulness and of unrighteousness, by outside attraction and gorgeous display, deceives all nations, promising them, as did Satan our first parents, all good to those who receive its mark, and all harm to those who oppose its fallacies. The power which has the deepest inward corruption will make the greatest display and will clothe itself with the most elaborate signs of power." In this passage, White identifies Babylon with papal authority, underscoring its dual nature, outward splendor and inward corruption. Notably, she applies motifs from Revelation 13 to Babylon in Revelation 17. The first parallel is the motif of deception through miracles. Commenting on the outward deceptiveness of Babylon papal power, White explains how it will act in the future. Babylon will deceive by means of miracles, signs of power. This recalls the motive of deception through false wonders, which, according to White, will be performed by satanic power in order to create the image of the beast at the end of time. The second parallel lies in the promise of either blessing or punishment, depending on the acceptance or rejection of the mark of the beast. The third parallel concerns the Protestantism. White writes, "The Bible plainly declares that this covers a corrupt and deceiving wickedness. Upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth." Revelation 17:5. What is it that gives its kingdom to this power? Protestantism, a power which, while professing to have the temper and spirit of a lamb and to be allied to heaven, speaks with the voice of a dragon. It is moved by a power from beneath. By identifying Babylon as the papacy, White explains how it regains authority and influence through Protestantism, which she interprets as the beast from the earth, Revelation 13 from 11 to 18. Here, White explicitly refers to the activity of the beast with the lamb-like horns, which, according to Revelation 13:12, will compel worship of the first beast, which she identifies as the papacy. As a result of the union of Protestantism and the state, the image of the beast will be formed. Elsewhere, Ellen G. White wrote about the connection between Babylon and the two-horned beast. She writes, "I saw that the two-horned beast had a dragon mouth, and that his power was in his head, and that the degree would go out of his mouth. Then I saw the mother of harlots, that the mother was not the daughters, but separate and distinct from them. She has had her day, and it is past. And her daughters Protestant sects were next to come on the stage and act out the same mind that the mother had when she persecuted the saints. I saw that as the mother has been declining in power, the daughters have been growing, and soon they will exercise the power once manifested by the mother. White connects the symbol of the two-horned beast in Revelation 13 with the symbol of the mother's daughters, maintaining that they point to Protestantism as the driving force which, in alliance with political powers, will advance the agenda of Catholicism. The fourth parallel is that in her commentary on both chapters, Revelation 13 and 17, White highlights the central issue of the eschatological conflict, the observance of the Sabbath versus Sunday. Thus, Ellen G. White's interpretation demonstrates that the eschatological dimension of Babylon in Revelation 17 and the eschatological dimension of the beast from the earth and the image of the beast in Revelation 13 are closely interconnected symbols. Together, they embody the final alliance of the papacy and apostate Protestantism, deception through miracles, coercion in worship, and the decisive eschatological test concerning the Sabbath and Sunday. Symbol of water. Ellen G. White also comments on Revelation 17:15 in her interpretation of the beast from the earth. In particular, she supports her identification of the beast from the earth as the United States of America by noting that the first beast arose from the sea, which in her views symbolizes a multitude of people and nations. She appeals to Daniel 7:2 and Revelation 17:15, writing, "In Revelation 17, an angel explains that waters represent people and multitudes and nations and tongues." Accordingly, White argues that the emergence of the second beast from the earth must signify the opposite. The earth, in contrast to the waters, symbolizes a sparsely populated territory. Conclusions. The analysis demonstrates that Ellen G. White's interpretation of Revelation 17 is marked by comprehensiveness, biblical argumentation, and a pronounced historicist perspective. She views the symbol of the harlot Babylon as a multifaceted category that encompasses not only the papacy, but also apostate Protestant churches that have followed its example. In White's interpretation of Revelation 17, the scarlet beast and the 10 horns represent political powers. The wine of Babylon symbolizes false doctrines. Intoxication with blood points to the persecutions of God's people. The alliance of the 10 horns with the beast and the harlot signifies a universal confederacy against God's people. And finally, the waters represent people. Furthermore, there are notable parallels between the eschatological conflict described in Revelation 17 and that in Revelation 13, suggesting that White understood the formation of the image of the beast in Revelation 13 as the end-time Babylon of Revelation 17. Her argumentation consistently draws on both biblical texts, Old Testament and New Testament, and historical evidence supported by citations from numerous authors across different confessional traditions. A distinctive feature of White's hermeneutics is the integration of three temporal dimensions of the harlot Babylon: the past, the historical role of the papacy, the present, the apostasy of Protestant churches, and the future, a global confederacy against God's commandments. Thus, her interpretation is not confined to a narrow historical identification, but outlines a broad eschatological perspective in which Revelation 17 occupies an important place. For White, these images are not merely historical symbols, but theological markers that shape the Adventist understanding of church history and last-day events. Accordingly, White's interpretation underscores not only the danger of false religious system, but also the relevance of the biblical call to come out of Babylon. In her understanding, this is less a polemic against particular denominations than a reminder of spiritual fidelity to God, His law, and Christ as the bridegroom. Such an approach allows Revelation 17 to be seen as a key text in the formation of Adventist eschatology, and at the same time as a meaningful contribution by White to the wider Protestant discourse on the interpretation of the Apocalypse. Thank you for your attention.
At this time, we'll take a break, and we'll restart at 10 o'clock sharp. Just to remind you, restrooms are straight out into the hall, or you can go down to the left, and there's restrooms down there as well.
hookup, so we'll have to leave it. There's no power here. I think I'll be okay, but is there something to stretch?
Then you'll need an extension.
I have an extension.
Yeah, I can start without it, Tom, but you can set it up while I'm speaking if you would. That's an Apple cord, but it is what it is. That was very expensive, 140 watts or something.
You have something? Is there an outlet there?
Oh, good. Oh, that's perfect. That's perfect. Yeah, I was afraid to replace that one because I was afraid it would kill the system.
You don't have an adapter
European.
European.
You know, the two pins and stuff.
Well, we have a place. I have one at home.
I guess we should get started, eh?
See, that clock is actually very fast, which doesn't hurt. It's a minute and a half fast. 9:52 actually. 9:52.
Yeah.
Yeah, this clock is, the time on that clock is incorrect.
So you're gonna wait till 10? Oh,
Start at 10. We'll start at 10 on that clock.
yeah, that's fine. Good. Yeah, this is what I needed, and that's wonderful. To be able to finish. I probably couldn't, but you don't want to take a chance. Anyway, bless you.
We're going to start in just a couple minutes. We invite you to come sit down.
What would I use it for at this age? Well, if someone will, yeah.
All right, we welcome you back. At this time, we have a presentation by Dr. John Pauline, my friend from Loma Linda University. He has been a longtime professor there of New Testament. Previously, he was at the seminary and taught me the book of Revelation when I was a doctoral student here. Thank you, John. And his presentation is Things I Think I Know About Revelation 17.
I was challenged this morning to talk just briefly about DARCOM, Daniel and Revelation Committee. As far as I know, I'm the last living member of that committee. It was a fantastic group. I mean, you had all the famous names, you know, Hazel and Holbrook and William Johnson and on and on and on. To be sitting there as the youngest person, drinking in that debate 2 weeks a year for like 7 years, that was, highlight of my scholarly life, and I learned so much there. But when Elder Falkenberg became president, his electoral promise, was to shrink the government. And one of the shrinks was the Daniel and Revelation Committee. So we never really got to Revelation 17. I know there are things in the book, but those were not discussed. Those were not debated and challenged, all right? So essentially, Daniel and Revelation Committee did not, in my recollection, ever discuss orally. I was in every meeting those years on the book of Revelation, and I'm pretty sure I would have remembered it. The very last thing we discussed was Daniel 12, and we went word by word through the Hebrew, and that was like, whoa. But that was never published because everything just was done. So that's unfortunate, but that means there's more work to be done, and that's why there are symposiums on Revelation 17 and Daniel 12 these days. And that's all right. Okay, things I think I know about Revelation 17. A number of years ago, I held a doctoral seminar here at Andrews University, and it was on Revelation 17, 7 to 11. And we had 5 students, and we worked our way through the Greek of Revelation 17. We looked at the Revelation 15 to 22 as a whole, how it might fit in there. Then each of the 5 students chose a topic within Revelation 17, 7 to 11. Either a word or a phrase or a sentence or an issue. And it wrote 40 to 60 page papers on each of those tiny issues. And when we got done with the seminar, we did a little debrief and concluded that we all felt less certain about the meaning of the passage than when we had started. And so I learned a few things from that. And let's see, why is this not advancing? Oh dear. Okay, got it, good. All right, you have to hit it 4 times, then it works. All right, like a donkey. Anyway, introduction. So I conclude the less you know about Revelation 17, the more confidence you have in your conclusions. So beware of a lot of confidence, I would say. If the result of this conference is a lack of consensus, we may have done our work well. And the third thing I learned from that, it isn't hard to have strong opinions on almost any subject as long as you're willing to ignore some of the evidence. I owe that to Robert Johnston, who was a colleague at the New Testament department at the seminary for many years, and it seems to have a lot of validity. And I'd love to see him before I leave town. All right, so I have here, over the years, I don't want to leave on a negative note, but rather say, through the years in interaction with the best Adventist scholarship and the best non-Adventist scholarship, I'm talking about friendship-level relationships, I've learned a lot about the Bible, what the Bible says and what it does not say. And in the process, what I want to highlight this morning is the things I think I know. In other words, what are the positives? What things can we stand on when we face the difficulties? And there's plenty of difficulties in Revelation 17 still today. But after 45 years of professional work in the larger context of scholarship, here's 9 things I'll share with you, and conscious of the time, limited to a couple minutes for each. First of all, Revelation 17 is an elaboration of the 6th and 7th plagues. All right, that's something I think I know. Revelation 17:1, one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and spoke with me. So Revelation 17 is introduced as an elaboration of one of the plagues. And it's one having to do with water, and I conclude elsewhere that it would be the 6th plague that is in view here, the drying up of the Euphrates River. The prostitute's called Babylon the Great, and ancient Babylon was located on the Euphrates River. Revelation 17:14 elaborates Armageddon. So the Battle of Armageddon is actually fought in 1714. And Revelation 17 is also connected with the 7th bowl plague. God remembered Babylon the Great. So the 6th and 7th plagues are the context. And of course, what that tells us is the fundamental location of Revelation 17 is the very end of time, at the close of the 7 last plagues. It has many echoes of earlier scriptures, earlier parts of the book of Revelation, but that's the specific point in time that Revelation 17 is talking about. Number 2, multiple symbols in Revelation 17 can represent the same entity in reality. What's happening? Sorry. No, what's that? It's wandering in other parts of my computer here, so that's what's going on. See, this is my PowerPoint here.
This is your presentation, yeah? And you should start it. Try starting.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, we're back. Okay. Sorry, folks. Technology is way over my head. All right, so multiple symbols can represent the same entity in reality. The 7 heads are 7 mountains, are 7 kings. So there's multiple symbols, but they all mean essentially the same thing. Jesus in the book is Son of Man, Lamb, male child, Michael. Church is 144,000, great multitude, woman, remnant, saints. Satan is dragon, ancient serpent, devil, one who deceives. If you try to make each symbol something unique in history, you're going to get twisted into a pretzel, is what I've learned. So I think seeing the intersections that symbols have with each other. Revelation 17, 1-3, you have a great prostitute who sits on many waters. But then she interacts with kings and with those who live on the earth, and then a woman sits on a scarlet beast. And I've put those in different colors because the red color represents the prostitute. The other colors represent something else, other powers in the world. So you have multiple symbols in Revelation 17 related to these different powers. So Babylon is prostitute woman city. The nations then are the waters, the kings of the earth, the beast, the Euphrates River, and so forth. So you essentially, in Revelation, have not multiple enemies of God, but two in number. Babylon, a worldwide religious alliance, and by the way, if Brother Kiriliak is accurate in his depiction of Ellen White, I think it is very compatible with what I'm sharing with you as the things I think I know. A worldwide religious alliance and a worldwide political alliance. So the major Old Testament background, number 3, to Revelation 17 is the fall of Babylon in Jeremiah 50:51 and Daniel 5. The sixth angel poured out his bowl on the great river Euphrates, and its water was dried up. You know, the angel of this plague is sharing with John chapter 17. So it has something to do with the fall of Babylon, the drying up of the Euphrates River. So the Euphrates is found in Revelation 17. The drying up is explained in the fall of Babylon story in the Old Testament. So you have the great prostitute sitting on many waters. Who's the great prostitute? Clearly, Babylon is the name. If Babylon is the prostitute, the waters are the Euphrates River. So here's a layout of Babylon, crude artwork. I own it. But Babylon was essentially a twin city on both sides, both banks of the Euphrates River. And so her fall is described in this way in Jeremiah, and there's multiple texts. A sword against the Babylonians, against her officials and wise men, against her false prophets, against her warriors. This is a list of Babylon's resources. So Jeremiah distinguishes between Babylon and the resources that make Babylon great. Those are smart people, leaders, leadership qualities, religious authorities, warriors, lots of armies, horses, chariots, foreigners in the ranks, allied nations, her treasures. You see, the wealth of Babylon can hire soldiers, etc., makes her strong. A drought on her waters, they will dry up. So the Euphrates River is one of the resources of Babylon that make Babylon strong. So Euphrates River in other texts represents all those resources. You don't have to repeat it every time. So the Euphrates River becomes a core symbol of everything that makes Babylon strong. In Revelation 17:15, this is defined as peoples, crowds, nations, and languages. So the Euphrates River represents secular political powers of the world, and a worldwide political alliance. And I was interested to see that in Brother Kiriliak's analysis of Ellen White, that she seems to have seen it that way as well. Isaiah 44, be dry, dry up your streams, who says of Cyrus, he's my shepherd. Now Cyrus now is a third figure in the story. Babylon, resources of Babylon, Cyrus now comes, a king from the east. He comes to Babylon, enters through the river gates, and allows God's people to leave. So the basic scenario of Revelation 15 to 22 is grounded in the Old Testament story of Cyrus, a king from the east, who dries up the Euphrates River, who conquers Babylon, delivers Israel, and rebuilds Jerusalem. The story of Revelation 15 to 18 is end-time Cyrus, kings from the east, end-time Euphrates, end-time Babylon, end-time Israel, and a new Jerusalem. So the big story of the last part of Revelation is grounded in the fall of Babylon narratives in the Old Testament. Now, I could spend an hour on each of these 9, and we're not going to do that today, but I'm just giving you a summary to see the big picture as I see it. There are 3 worldwide end-time entities in Revelation 17. Babylon, a worldwide religious alliance, and I like to suggest visible religions. These are the institutions, the structures of religion worldwide. And these parallel, as Dr. Stefanovic mentioned, with the woman of chapter 12. It parallels with Israel's high priest. In verses 4 and 5, echo the dress of the high priest. And the fate of the high priest's daughter is to be burned with fire rather than stoned. So Babylon is clearly a religious figure. I like to say has a Christian face, but is perhaps bigger than that. The nations, worldwide civil political alliance, peoples, nations, languages, many waters, kings of the earth, beast, 7 heads, 7 kings, 10 horns, 10 kings, cities of the nations, merchants and sailors, by many different symbols representing basically the political structures of the world, which for a time in the end support Babylon. But there's a third entity hinted at by the Cyrus reference, the saints, named in chapter 17, verse 6, a worldwide alliance of the faithful. They're also named in verse 14, the called, chosen, faithful ones. Elsewhere in Revelation, they're the 144,000, the great multitude, the remnant. And they are those who keep watch. In the middle of the Battle of Armageddon, those who keep watch and hang on to their garments so that they will not walk naked. That's all representation of the end-time people of God. Some observations. The saints seem loosely organized, if at all. In other words, the saints in the end will not be a structure. And I think Ellen White even suggests that there will be a time when we can't do preaching and stuff, but it'll be only medical ministry work and so on, that the church as a structure would not survive Babylon. So the saints are loosely organized, if at all. In other words, when the saints are addressed, it's more at an individual level, the called, chosen, and faithful followers. Babylon has a Christian face, but is bigger than a single Christian religion. And adultery / drunkenness unites the religious and political alliances for a time. A story of its own. Number 5, let me see. Yeah, we're okay. Revelation 17's structure has 2 main parts, a vision and an angelic explanation of the vision. As has already been said today, verses 1 and 2 are kind of an uncertain piece. It's more of an audition. John is told certain things. The actual vision is verse 3 through 6a. And then there's an angelic explanation of the vision. So in verse 3, I saw a woman sitting. You don't see that in verse 1. It's in verse 3, I saw. A typical visionary introduction in Revelation. I saw a woman sitting on the beast. I saw a woman drunk with the blood of the saints. But then in 17:7, the angel said to me, all right, we're moving from vision to explanation. Why are you amazed? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast. So the person who receives the explanation is John. And so it goes throughout the chapter. The beast which you saw, the 10 horns which you saw, the waters which you saw, the 10 horns which you saw, the woman which you saw. In other words, the purpose of the explanation is to meet John where he is with his questions, his needs to interpretation. And this is typical of such prophetic images elsewhere in the Bible. For example, in Daniel 2, Daniel recites the vision, then he says, "You, Nebuchadnezzar, are the head of gold. Another kingdom will arise after you." So the explanation comes for the benefit of the one who had the vision, which in this case was Nebuchadnezzar. Please don't be offended by the word vision. It's in the Aramaic in Daniel 2, not just Daniel 7. So God is somehow doing prophetic work with a pagan king, which is a fascinating element. Daniel 7, "As for me, Daniel, my spirit within me was anxious, and the visions of my head alarmed me. I approached one of those who stood there and asked him the truth concerning this. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of the things." So when it comes to visionary biblical prophecy, there is a vision where the prophet can go anytime and any place. He can go all the way to the end of time and see the stone, crush the image, etc. But the explanation comes for the benefit of the one who received the vision. That's the biblical pattern that I see. Daniel 8. "When I, Daniel, had seen the vision, I sought to understand it." So it's Daniel's understanding that is crucial here. "And behold, there stood before me one having the appearance of a man, and I heard a man's voice between the banks of the Ulai, and it called, 'Gabriel, make this man understand the vision.'" All right? So you have visions and explanations. And in the vision, the prophet can go anywhere, anytime. In the explanation, it zeroes in on the prophet's time and place so that the prophet can gain an understanding for our benefit, ultimately. So in Revelation 17, this is one of the challenging items. The explanation comes to John. 5 have fallen. It's an aorist indicative, point in past time. 1 exists now, present indicative. It's here now and continuing now. 1 has not yet come. It's again aorist indicative, but it negates it. Okay, that reality of the 7th one ain't here yet. All right, so it negates that way. So you have past, 5 kings, present, 1 is now, future, 1 has not yet come. So I think that's to see that from John's perspective, I think is the biblical, what the Bible prophetic pattern encourages me to believe. All right, number 6. Babylon is strongly parallel to the New Jerusalem. And I'll only give a summary here, but this is one thing that got into Darkham, the volumes. We did examine the paper by Roberto Badenas on the New Jerusalem. So that's one piece toward the end of that book that actually was vetted by the committee, and I thought it was magnificent. And so he notes that Revelation 17:1 and 21:9 are virtually identical in the Greek. And the same angel is telling both. So the same angel that talks about Revelation 17 comes back to talk about the New Jerusalem. Carried away in the Spirit happens in both. John sees Babylon and the New Jerusalem, that the two are juxtaposed. The dwelling place of demons, the dwelling place of God. Names are written or are not written in the book of life. A place of death and a place of no more death. All right, so you could do another dozen or more, but the parallels, explicit Greek language, etc., I think Babylon is parallel to Jerusalem. And the one obvious thing, I think, is the New Jerusalem comes down from heaven and settles on the ruins of Babylon. So I don't know if that's literal Iraq or something, or maybe just a conceptual idea. But the idea is that the New Jerusalem is very closely related to Babylon. They are two sides of a coin, alter egos, positive, negative, but related. Number 7, while Revelation 17 takes a global approach to the end times, the book Great Controversy approaches the same events from a local perspective. In other words, the difference between talking about the grand movements of nations and seeing the same events from a single person's perspective. When you go to the book Great Controversy, the kinds of things you see in chapter 17 are happening, but it's a small town, presumably in New England. And it is from the perspective of a viewer looking at that small town. So you're seeing the great worldwide events from a local perspective. And that really helped me to put a lot of pieces together when I saw that. Revelation 17 takes a global approach to the end, kings of the whole inhabited world, those who live on the earth, cities of the nations, peoples, multitudes, and nations. Babylon rules over the kings of the earth. 3 worldwide alliances, religion, political alliance, the saints. Great Controversy approaches the same events from a local perspective. She describes the individual physical and emotional trauma of those days. The saints are in solitary retreats out of town. I always have Berrien Springs in mind whenever I think about that, out there in Baroda somewhere, solitary retreat. Angry multitudes leave town wanting to kill them. They're provoked by their ministers and religious teachers. There you have the religious alliance, the political alliance, the police and the preachers working together to eliminate God's people. The outcome in Great Controversy, God intervenes, signaling his approval of the saints. Angry mobs realize they've been deceived. They go back to town and take it out on the ministers and religious teachers. 8, the 10 horns of the beast are distinct in meaning from the 7 heads. However you interpret them, the 7 heads, kings of Revelation 17, are consecutive. 5 have fallen, 1 exists now, 1 has not yet come. The 10 horns, on the other hand, are contemporaneous and future. These have not yet received a kingdom, but they receive authority as kings for 1 hour with the beast. So most of the 7 heads kings function one by one well before the end. At the end of time, the 10 horns kings come to power together, they function together, and they pass off the scene together. So the 10 horns and the 7 heads, while they're attached to the same beast in the image, are not anywhere close in terms of time on the whole. All right, final. Maybe, I say this time. And the reason for the maybe is that this is not something I worked up myself. I owe this to Rebecca Liu, who is with us today. And why don't you wave so everybody knows who you are? And her dissertation on the image of the beast just put a lot of stuff together for me, also about Revelation 17. I'm going to share with you, since I haven't worked this out in detail for myself, but I'm thoroughly convinced by the work that she did. And here's my summary. You will hear from her, I think, this afternoon, so pay good attention. The image of the beast is the last stage of the unholy trinity. You have dragon, beast from the sea, beast from the earth, and then together they create the image of the beast. So it's the last stage of the unholy trinity. The land beast, honoring the sea beast, which mirrors the dragon, sets up the image of the beast. So it's a new thing at the end of time. Rebecca notes that there's strong parallels between Revelation 13 and 14. the sea beast paralleling the lamb, land beast paralleling the first angel, mark of the beast, of course, in both. The image of the beast does not appear in chapter 14 unless it is Babylon. So the appearance of Babylon right in the middle, corresponding to the image of the beast, is striking. It's not proof by itself, but it's striking. Worshipping the beast in its image, then, is the same as drinking the wine of Babylon. But then in chapter 16, 13, it's the only time in the book that dragon, beast, and false prophet are all together and listed, as a unit. I saw out of the mouth of the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet 3 unclean spirits like frogs. So it's the first time the 3 are mentioned together. But then in verse 19, it tells us the great city split into 3 parts. What are those 3 parts? Well, in the context, dragon, beast, and false prophet. Babylon the Great, remembered before God. So the 3 parts are listed in 16:13. Dragon, beast, and false prophet. And here you think of great controversy. That really makes a lot of sense, that these 3 together would be Babylon. So here's the big picture. The image of the beast arrives as a major player in the final events. You've got a big introduction. You're expecting it to dominate the rest of the narrative. But it never appears again. It's mentioned, but always in its chapter 13 context. It never acts in the rest of the book. It is never destroyed by fire, like the others, the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet are. It's not mentioned at all in Revelation 17 and 18, where the star of the show is Babylon. If the image of the beast, that's why I say maybe, if the image of the beast is Babylon, the story, the big story of Revelation is, in my view, complete. Final words, and I'll be really quick. Revelation 17 is super difficult. I've studied with scholarly tools and many colleagues for 45 years. Little by little, some things have begun to fall into place, but much is still uncertain to me. But I hope that these things I'm sharing now will provide a foundation for moving forward as a group this week. And I'm hoping that I myself will expand what I think I know this week, thanks to you.
All right, at this time we have 20 minutes for questions. So what we're going to do is we have several people that will take microphones. You raise your hand, you can ask your question, and then Dr. Pauline will respond. This is specifically in regards to his presentation here. And so raise your hand. Let's get the questions.
Second, yeah. Thank you very much for your presentation. I really appreciated how you connected the New Jerusalem and Babylon. I hadn't thought of that before. And
hold the microphone, don't hold the very end of the microphone. Hold the microphone higher up and put it close to your mouth.
do I need to repeat all that? Okay. Okay, so my question is this. You mentioned a pretty popular idea that there won't be a church organization at the end. So I just wanted your thoughts on this quote from Sister White. I know that the Lord loves his church. It is not to be disorganized or broken up into independent atoms. There is not the least consistency in this. There is not the least evidence that such a thing will be. Mm-hmm. So how can we say there won't be if she says there's not the least evidence that such a thing will be?
Well, I would never say never, okay? But I would note that the same author says repeatedly, all the promises and threatenings of God are alike conditional. So to some degree, there's a conditional element in all those kind of statements about exactly what will happen to the church at the end. And when she's speaking of church, is she primarily talking about institutional church with its structures, or is she talking about the group of believers, et cetera? So those are things I would ponder in relation to that. It seems to me what you have here is you have a worldwide alliance of religious institutions. You have a worldwide alliance of political institutions. Where will the Seventh-day Adventist as an institution be at that time? And it seems to me there are two options. It could join Babylon or be destroyed as an institutional entity. And you'll notice that when the saints are spoken about, it's not like another beast or animal or something. It's spoken of, you are the called, the chosen, the faithful ones. So I'm leaning to the idea that the end time people will be kindred spirits who will know each other and find each other all over the earth, and they will probably include a lot of surprising people, like Muslims who've been studying the prophecies and coming to similar conclusions that Adventists do. I think we'll be surprised at how big the church becomes at the end. But it won't be, for political reasons, it won't be able to function in the way that it functions today. It might be a bit like what was that, in the 1960s in the People's Republic. There was no structure, and yet the church survived, beautifully survived.
Here, thank you, Dr. Pauline. I have a very narrow question, is related to one of your conclusions, that Babylon would encompass that trio, dragon, sea beast, and false prophet. In the context of Revelation 16:19 that you also cited, there is a great earthquake, and one of the three parts collapsed as a result of that earthquake. Do you equate the cities of the nations with one of the three? Because they fell during the earthquake. And also I would like to mention that none of these three are killed except in the lake of fire later. So although the earthquake came, let's say, affected the trio, nothing really happened to the three. Thank you.
Yeah, I think you've rightly highlighted there are plenty of things yet to ponder. There are things in the text that don't easily come together there. But I would see you had those three powers, and in chapter 17, Babylon falls first, and it's the Euphrates, it's the nations that destroy her, and then you get what comes to them shortly after. And so I think you do have that in chapter 16, that Babylon is remembered by God and the cities of the nations fall. So it's showing the two sides, the political and the religious. All right.
One question on one of your other slides. You talked about the 5 kings that have fallen, one is and one is yet to come. You didn't mention your thinking on the timing of when that is. Do you take it from as related to John's day, or do you take it as more related to end-time events?
Well, I'm compelled by the prophetic pattern that the explanation is there, as it says in the text, for John's benefit, to share with us. But it's for his benefit in his context. I think one of the great principles of the Bible is that God meets people where they are. I don't think we take that seriously enough when it comes to prophecy, that there is an original context. God chose to give revelation in 95, not in 1995. And he chose that for a reason. And so understanding the original meaning of those terms, the original context, how it would be understood, is a good safeguard and foundation for the speculations we might throw at the text later on. So I understand explanations meet the prophet and the prophet's time and place. And by the way, the language in the Aramaic of Daniel 2 and Daniel 7 is identical. Both Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar lay on their bed, had visions in their head as they lay on their bed. So this prophetic intro is given equally to Nebuchadnezzar twice, also in chapter 4. And then Daniel gets it finally in chapter 7. So God is saying that God is behind the vision, and it is a vision that Nebuchadnezzar gets and that Daniel gets. But notice that the vision of Daniel 2 is a vision of an idol representing the gods of the nations. I might have questioned if God had asked me about that. Is it okay if I do that? I don't know. People will misunderstand. But God gave it to Nebuchadnezzar, met him where he was. Same vision, same 4 kingdoms. In Daniel 7, the background there is creation, a stormy sea. Animals appear. A son of man has dominion over the animals. So to the Hebrew prophet, the story of creation, to the pagan king, the world of idolatry that he was familiar with, is the context God uses. And God did both of those. It wasn't Daniel changing it. It was God meeting him where he is. And I think we need to take that very seriously as we study prophecy. Not just what it means to us today, but first of all, understand why was it given then? And what was the message then? What does the language point to then? And then we might be on safe ground to say, okay, we can see it this way or that way.
So, Doctor, I was just wondering, you connected the vision with the plagues, and, in particular, the 6th and the 7th plagues. So can you elaborate more on how you see it unfolding in the future? What really help us to identify when Babylon comes under judgment in that context?
Okay. Now, I want to be conscious of John 13:19, where Jesus says that I tell you ahead of time so that when it happens, you will know. That's a principle that prophecy about the future is always a little bit ambiguous, so that when the time comes, then the understanding is clear. So that's my caveat to what I'm going to say. But I do think one can speculate reasonably about Revelation 17. I believe that if I've rightly understood the chapter, that September 11 was almost a dress rehearsal for the picture of Revelation 17. On September 11, you had an entire world that had never heard of Al-Qaeda. Never heard of it. 3 days later, President Bush gives a speech, and suddenly I and everybody else for the first time, Al-Qaeda, what's that, etc. The entire world, almost overnight, the political powers, remember Russia, Iran, were all coming to the United States saying, can we help, all the religions of the world, including Islam, were united against these guys living in caves in the rocks and the mountains. It illustrated to me how quickly the scenario of these 3 alliances could happen in today's world. We think right now, no way would the world focus on the Sabbath. No way would the Lord focus on this humble little group of people. But circumstances can cause rapid shifts in people's thinking. And that's what I see happening in Revelation 17. You have a world that for whatever reason talks about adultery, talks about drunkenness, etc. For whatever reason, that world chooses to come together, political and religious, against a small group of individuals scattered all over the world. That's the scenario I see in Revelation 17. And we saw a glimpse of that, I think, about 25 years ago. Again, that's speculation of the future, all right? But that's how I would see it right now.
Yeah, Dr. Pauline, I'm just curious if you have an opinion on who the 5 are that have fallen in the past, who the one is at the moment when the angel said that, and then who is the one that's coming for a short space? Just a curiosity question.
Okay, some of that probes into things I think I know, and some of it maybe not. But that's all right. I appreciate the question. Who are these 5? Obviously, if you start with Babylon, you can't come up with 5. So the simplest way that is union among Adventist scholars is that if those 5 are before John's day, you got to start with Egypt. Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, Greece, those are the 5 superpowers of the ancient world. And then the one that is would be pagan Rome, and the one that is yet to come would then be papal Rome. But the 8th is neither a head nor a king. The Greek text doesn't have it. Translators do, but the Greek text doesn't have it. It's neither a head nor a king. The 8th is its own unique entity at the end of time. And I would understand the beast to be this worldwide political alliance that chooses to support Babylon for a short time. It's a quick and dirty answer to a very interesting and challenging question.
I have a question about the Babylon part. So judging by what you just said, you named 5. Why didn't God start with Egypt then? Why is Babylon where God chose to start for us in the end times? That has perplexed me.
Well, I guess one answer to that would be that Babylon doesn't begin with Nebuchadnezzar. Babylon begins at the Tower of Babel. And the word Babel actually means gate of God. So it was a counterfeit path to God. The Tower of Babel is a counterfeit path to God right from the start. So Babylon, I think, becomes the overarching enemy because it goes all the way back almost to the Garden of Eden and continues on through to the end. So that would be the reason to make Babylon, I think, central in the narrative of Revelation. And of course, the narrative of Babylon's fall, Cyrus and everything, it just fits the narrative of Revelation so beautifully. So I would say, yeah, Babylon is earlier than Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar is just one of many representatives of Babylon.
My question has to do with the many waters, because when you read in Psalm 29, verses 3 and 10, it talks about the voice of the Lord is upon the waters. The Lord sitteth upon the flood. And of course, we see that language, especially as Satan uses a flood to chase after the woman that's been given 2 great wings. But in Isaiah 17, 12, and 13, it says, "Woe to the multitude of many people which make a noise like the noise of the seas, and to the rushing of nations that make a rushing like the rushing of mighty waters." And so when we talk about the woman sitting on the beast and upon the waters, wouldn't that include more than just the Euphrates River?
Well, the root text, and as you may or may not know, my claim to scholarly fame outside the Adventist Church is probably in the very issue of what Old Testament text is being thought of as John writes. That's a really challenging concept, and scholars are all over the map. And I developed a methodology for determining such things in the book of Revelation. Revelation never quotes the Old Testament. It just hints at it here and there. How do you know what was in John's mind as he was receiving this vision and writing it down? So there's a whole process that one goes through there. I've concluded that the key allusion there is Jeremiah 51:13, which you might want to look up, where it speaks of Babylon who sits on many waters, which is clearly the Euphrates River. So I think Revelation 17, within the narrative of the fall of Babylon, is zeroing in on the Euphrates River as a crucial symbol related to Babylon's fall.
One more question.
Dr. Pauling, just curiosity at your comment about the 8th head not being a beast or a head, I guess.
Not being a king or a head. Yeah.
Right. Revelation 17:11 talks about the beast that was and is not is the eighth, and it's of the seven. And if the seven are kingdoms, it's just curious to me that why the eighth wouldn't also be a kingdom. Anyway, just maybe if you could comment more on that.
You're probing into the things I think I don't know, and that's okay. There's plenty of those in chapter 17. What I understand then is that the eighth is not listed as a head because there's only 7 heads. The eighth is not listed as a king for whatever reason, but it just says the eighth is of the 7, not one of the 7, but it's of the same character as the 7. So if a translator puts in kings there, I'm not offended by that. I'm just saying it's not in the text. That's something you have to add to the text to make it work for you. And I always try to be cautious about that. But the eighth, as I understand it, would be the beast in the vision of 17. It's in the context of the 7 last plagues. It's the very last time of Earth's history. This is the union of political powers once the 10 horns add, which could be NATO or G8 or whatever, but it's some subgroup of the world's nations. When it joins in with the beast, then the union is complete, and the final persecution begins, and the events that follow. So my understanding is the eighth, and I'm still trying to figure that one out. I think Anthony McPherson's paper, which he's not here, but the paper is, I think, in the website. Very, very helpful wrestling with some of that.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Parleen. We'll take a 10-minute break. Now, last time our break was longer than 10 minutes, so just understand it's 10 minutes now. And then Dr. Mott will give his presentation. Thanks, John.
Yeah, Dr. Mott's is more important, so you have to have a smaller break. Okay. Well, I guess we have a break, so we can go now if you want. Let's get away from the microphone. Let me just shut the computer down. Yeah.
AV team, please mute the mics for now. Thank you.
All right, it's about time for us to begin. We invite you to take a seat, and we'll have an opening prayer here for this presentation as well. All right. Welcome back to our presentations. Let us pray as we start. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for the opportunity we have once again to hear another presentation. We pray that you'll bless Dr. Mott as he presents to us, and we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. Dr. Mott.
Okay, thank you very much again to the organizers for this invitation. I am sharing with you a research that in time improved, of course. I had done a paper when I was a student at IAS some good years ago, and then a review of 2 articles of Ekehard Müller during the same time on Revelation 17 as well, the 2 articles. So from there, I developed a passion for this chapter. Today, I will only deal with verses 7 through 11. First of all, the task that I have ahead is identifying the 7 heads and beast in history. And the questions that I'm going to raise and try to answer are questions on the times of the beast, its relation with the prostitute, its relation with the 7 heads, and correspondence between the heads, beast, and history. As a method, I'm examining the language and also the intra- and intertextuality of the passage. As an outline, we will go through some Adventist interpretations, and then 2 issues related to time, as I already mentioned. The third part is beast and prostitute, essentials of a rendezvous, a French word, their, relation. 4, the 7 heads in history, and 5, at the end, I'll focus on the 8th, an 8th, but of the 7. The beast and its 7 heads in history, Adventist interpretations. The history of reception is not just a history, but an instrument of discovering the rich meaning of a text. In other words, the variety of interpretations shows the richness of the symbol in case. It is normal to expect the symbol to communicate different things to different audiences. I can only imagine that the generation of the eschaton would best integrate the biblical apocalyptic into their actual context. Meanwhile, we remain tentative while taking advantage of the richness of preceding interpretations. Leonard Thompson, non-Adventist, considers that John's spirit-inspired language was initially seen by himself, as well as by later readers, as being precise and limited to their context. However, the symbol or metaphor is abundant and complex enough to open, and this is the quotation, onto something more abundant and complex. Emperors, imperial edicts, celebrations of Roman culture, as well as bishops, house churches, and economic necessities were but the ephemeral surface of a deep ocean of reality. The apocalyptic prophecy then has the capacity to be relevant on the way to fulfillment. To a certain extent, the significance of the beast heads in Adventist understanding seems to generally be at a consensus. The heads are symbolic of kingdoms, or kings as a metonymy of kingdoms, and they never represent individuals, at least in academic circles, whether it be Caesars or popes. Concerning the historical identification of the 7 kingdoms of the beast, however, there have been 5 proposals that will be delineated below. Not everything fitted on one screen, so I split it into 2. You have the tradition of Smith and Haskell, which speaks of 7 heads only in terms of Rome in different phases, kingly, consular, and so on. And then you have 2 streams. From Anderson to Dukan, interpreters that start the counting from Babylon, basically with the background of Daniel in mind, because Daniel begins the count from Babylon. And then you have Strand, Stefanovic, Pauline, and the rest beginning with Egypt. So there is this different beginning when you look at the table as such. Things are not as clear as before on the second part of the table, where the same people try their best to identify the sixth, the seventh, and the beast itself. You have here, I cannot speak of all the table, but I will just highlight a few things. Some confusion related to the eighth, being more or less the same with the seventh. You have that in a few places. You have sometimes, especially at Maxwell, but not only, the idea that papacy occupies the fifth, the sixth, and the seventh head. So 3 stages, the same entity, in different, of course, situations. And then you have also, in some cases, the introduction of the earth beast in the scheme of the seven-headed beast. So the earth beast is, to some interpreters, a head at some point of the seven-headed beast. And then you have the proposal also when you go to the beast itself that is not only historical, like identifying some kind of institution, but also Satan, as it is on the penultimate column as you look to the right. What next? Should the uncertainties in the table above are to be softened, several questions need to be readdressed. What is the vision's time reference? John's context or the time of the end? What is the relationship between the prostitute and the beast? And more specifically, when, in what phase, is the woman riding the beast? All the way through the 7 heads or some time. Regarding to temporal issues, temporal intricacies, there are 2 things to clarify. The first, one must remember that in an apocalyptic vision, tense anomalies are usual. This is why John can write in the present or past tense about things way ahead of his time. Behold, he is coming with the clouds, present. The hour of his judgment has come, aorist or past. And fallen is Babylon again, aorist, to name just a few. However, the interpretation of a vision is something else. When the angelic being interprets the meaning of the vision to John, he addresses the prophet considering him what he was, a first-century recipient. If this is not accepted, the whole idea of clarification makes little to no sense, at least to him. It was John's marvel which generated the angelic explanation after all. The seer is the one who needs further explanations first. And these must have been grounded in his time and space. Therefore, the time reference must be John's day. By that day, 5 kings were fallen, 1 was, and the 7th was about to come. The second issue of time-related, is how does one solve the continuous and discontinuous aspects of the beast? On the one hand, the beast is not, and on the one hand, the 6th head is, as one can see from the table below. And you have the 4 references, 2 times in verse 8, 1 in verse 10, and once in verse 11. Revelation 17:11 seems to be the key to unlock this mystery. This verse discriminates between the beast and its 7 heads. The beast is an 8th king, and no matter what it means that this 8th is also of the 7, the Greek of the verse shows a difference between the beast in its last phase, that is the 8th, and the beast in its 7 successive phases. In this sense, the beast exists as long as it has a living head on its shoulders. So, in other words, what I'm proposing is to see the 3 division, the beast was, is not, and will come, related to the seven heads in the following way. The beast was all the time throughout its seven heads, because one head replaces another, but at some point you end the list with the last one. Then the beast is not, which is the period when it's thrown into the abyss, and then the beast will come again out of the abyss as an eighth. When it comes to the description of the beast that was, is not, and will come, the tenses used, especially the present, is what is called in grammars omnitemporal or timeless. They do not have the usual time orientation. In other words, the phrase as such is true any time as long as things remain the same. But when something changes, the phrase applies to the moment of change. For example, God is always the one who is, who was, and who is coming, even before he comes. That's the name. It's omnitemporal, it's timeless. Likewise, the beast is any time the one who was, is not, and will come or be present, even before it comes to the state of being not or to the moment of coming out of the abyss. The third part, beast and prostitute essentials of a relationship, of a rendezvous, identifying the prostitute from literary and historical perspectives. Although the attributes city and queen, having dominion over the kings of the earth, make Babylon a political and administrative body, many more features of it have a strong religious tinge. And you have a table below which puts together a number of these features. Babylon is a woman, not only a woman, but is a prostitute, is identified specifically as Jerusalem in Revelation 11:8, who kills Christ, but also Jerusalem who kills the prophets in 1824. It's also related in terms from the perspective of its nakedness. His punishment is resembled with Samaria and Jerusalem in 1816. That makes reference to Ezekiel 16 and 23. And also, as Dr. Pauline also mentioned, there's priestly language surrounding her. For example, some authors say that even being drunk with blood is a communion allusion, just that she does not take regular communion with the blood of Christ, but with the blood of the saints. So really, these things present Babylon as religious more than political. Considering Babylon a religious construct, I see it as a Jesus-related faith tradition. From the perspective of the first century, to interpret these symbols denominationally would be anachronic. Therefore, we should not overinterpret it, at least from the perspective of the first century, as I said. At the same time, we have to recognize that some sectors of Christianity did become major players in the affairs of the Western world, and the prophecy can and was applied to this later. Adventist interpreters have identified a queen-like woman with the alienated or corrupt Protestant churches, Roman Christianity, or a combination of both. The Middle Ages ecclesiastical Rome is arguably a sample from the past of how Christianity could deteriorate in terms of attitude and positive influence of the medieval universal church violently turned against those contesting its teachings and or authority. But the Johannine vision focuses on an end-time representation, which seems broader. To be honest with the data, the concept of Babylon implies more than just one monolithic religious construct. It seems that a religious union is in view here. From this perspective, the woman, the eschatological apostate Christianity, Western, but I would add, because I come from the East, also Eastern, will ride the beast in the end times, when this union is formed and the beast is coming out of the abyss. The seven heads in history, identifying sequential powers hostile to the saints. The Greek term therion depicts different kinds of wild animals. The symbolic usage is found primarily in Daniel, where the term stands for a king as a representative of a kingdom. In the Jewish apocalyptic literature, beasts like Leviathan and Behemoth are pictured as persecuting God's people, revolting against the Messiah, and being punished in the abyss. All these are common motifs in Revelation. The beast is a sum of multiple sequential powers. One way to establish the seven heads in history is to start from the kingdom which was operating in John's time, that is Rome, and count down, backwards, 5 times, and upwards once or twice, if we consider the beast itself also. The beginning point of the 7 kingdoms is to be established starting from the nature of the beast. This political entity is hostile to God and the faithful. Taking the history of Israel as framework, the starting point is Egypt, the first kingdom which takes Israel into captivity. In fact, Egypt is called a drakon, the Greek word, dragon, in Ezekiel 2 times. And this favors the inclusion of this ancient power among the stages of the 7-headed beast. With one exception, the Hebrew tanin is always translated in the Septuagint by drakon. The Hebrew noun, which means sea monster and points to Egypt, is used eschatologically in Isaiah 27 verse 1 in association with 2 different serpents or leviathans to be punished by God's sword. Apparently, the other 2 are Assyria and Babylon. All 3 are beasts who ferociously attacked Israel. So Egypt, Assyria, and Babylon in order. Counting from that starting point, Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, and Greece were the first 5 kings who were fallen by the time of Revelation. The Roman Empire was the power in exercise throughout John's lifetime. The 7th kingdom, which was not yet present in the 1st century, was most probably Christian Rome plus the 10 kings, which are the same 11-horned powers of the Roman beast in Daniel 7 and 8. The dominance of the little horn among the Danielic horns is iterated in Revelation by the preeminence of the scarlet beast over the 10 horns. To see Western Christianity behind the 7th head makes sense historically. The power, the authority, and the throne of Rome are symbolically passed on to the Christian leadership in the West, beginning with the 4th century. This makes it clear why the imperial benefits of the dragon end up in the hands of the sea beast, not by conquest, but by bequest. Western Christianity does not conquer like the previous beasts, but becomes royal by inheritance. The fact that the 7th head must remain for a little while is not an objection, because Satan has a longer little while that will pass until the end of time, until the eschaton. Note, the woman does not ride the beast during its 7 heads, but in its last stage, the 8th. John sees the letter without crowns, so the beast is without crowns. So there is no anachronism here. For example, like church riding Egypt or church riding Assyria. And here we come to the last point, which is also the most extensive. An 8th, but of the 7. What is the mystery of the 8th? In order to identify the beast in its last manifestation, we need to clarify how the beast relates to the 7 heads. And this we do by making sense of the statement that the beast is a separate entity, but also of the 7. The formula ek, the preposition, plus a cardinal numeral, is found 17 times in the New Testament. Within this formula, the preposition refers either to the source or origin of which something comes out of the 4 winds, for example, but there are many examples. Or it refers to a part of a bigger whole, one of the 12, for example, or being of the 7. It's very similar to here in Acts 21, verse 8, a phrase. From a semantic standpoint, both meanings are possible in Revelation 17:11, and they virtually say the same thing, practically. The beast is both coming out of the seven as a source, in that sense, and is also part of the seven. Of the two, however, the partitive sense, the second one, is more prevalent in these kinds of constructions, and therefore more probable in Revelation 17:11. While the number of the heads is 7, the beast is an eighth, not an eighth head, but probably an eighth king. This eludes the readers of Revelation because the gender agreement of the masculine ordinal an eighth is probably made with the noun king, which is masculine, not with the noun head, which is feminine. This tells us that the beast is an eighth king, but not an eighth head. That is why the beast is in fact a part of the seven heads in a new royalty. Comparing chapters 11, 12, 13, 16, and 17, where the seven-headed beast appears, to the adversaries of God's faithful, as adversaries of God's faithful, a certain conclusion emerges. The only possible parallel for the eighth is found in chapter 13. And here's where I want to plead for something that I have not read somewhere else, and that is that a seven-headed entity is just one entity in different stages. We have the dragon and the scarlet beast sharing a similar color. We have the dragon and the sea beast sharing the same period of persecution. We have the sea beast and the scarlet beast dying and rising up, and also producing blasphemies. So you have these direct correspondences between these actors. And also, all three have identical constitution, 7 heads and 10 horns. That suggests, or all these actually suggest, that we can look at the seven-headed beast as one entity in different stages, although it has different names like dragon, sea beast, and then scarlet beast. What we see in the text is that there is a difference between them which speaks of their stages. For example, the dragon has the crowns on the heads, but the sea beast has no crowns on the heads, but only on the horns. And also you have the scarlet beast with no crowns, either on the heads or on the horns, but the text says it will receive authority, that is, as kings, that is a crown, right? They will receive, the beast will receive crowns with the kings, with the 10 kings for 1 hour, one last hour. So this tells me that we have actually just one entity in different periods. My argument is going to be one view, one version. During the conference, you will hear also another one. Dr. Pauline already mentioned the idea endorsed by Rebecca here with us, that the eighth is Babylon. I will argue actually that the eighth is the image of the beast. Both the scarlet beast and the icon of the sea beast come from the realm of the is not. That is, they receive life. This is one correspondence between the beast itself and the image of the beast in Revelation 13. So both experience a is not period and then coming back to life. Both of them are old entities in a new development. The image of the beast is the image of an existent beast, and the eighth or an eighth, the beast itself, is of the 7. So it has some parts of the 7. Also, both of them are in conflict with the Lamb and his followers. The last point is well illustrated by the identical vocabulary. provided that the beast coming out of the abyss in chapter 11 and 17 is the same institution. The beast kills, in 11:7, the two witnesses, just as the image of the beast made those who refuse to worship it, the image, to be killed. Same verb. Furthermore, the war, the Greek word polemos, against the witnesses in 11:7 corresponds to the war of the dragon against those who have the testimony in 12:17. The war alluded to in 12:17 actually represents the assault of the beast in its last phase. That is, as I propose, when the image of the beast is formed against the saints, as many passages say. The wisdom and mind that readers need in order to, and also those facing the beast, need in order to oppose the mark of the beast is recalled for understanding the scarlet beast in its last phase. This is another correspondence. These numerous parallels make the identification of the eighth king with the image of the sea beast highly plausible. Interestingly, the pairs of the image of the beast and the scarlet beast also correspond at two levels at least. The sea beast in Revelation 13 seems to correlate with the woman Babylon in chapter 17, because the worshippers of the sea beast exclaim, "Who is like the beast?" Just as the seamen ask about the whore Babylon, "Who is like the great city?" Likewise, the war of the sea beast against the saints seems to be reflected in the picture of the prostitute being drunk with the blood of the saints. As argued before, the woman who rides the scarlet beast in the last phase is a false Jerusalem, a proper symbol of apostate Christianity. The scarlet beast as an eighth king represents the last kingdom, supported by the earth beast and the 10 horns. Under the influential authority of the terrestrial beast, an eschatological icon or image of the medieval papacy will be formed at the very end of time. This image will be an institution which for a while will be under the control of apostate Christianity. What remained of the sea beast, that is the 10 kings, will yield their power to the scarlet beast and form the image of the sea beast. That's why the eighth is of the 7, because it retains these 10 kings from the previous head. The payoff. Interpreting the dragon, the sea beast, and the scarlet beast as the same 7-headed entity in different phases and identifying the 8th phase of the beast with the image of the beast from Revelation 13 has important explanatory advantages. The reader of Revelation must have wondered, how come the image of the beast is never described as being destroyed, although is the main adversary in the final events? If this is one and the same entity with the sea beast in its last role, then, with the beast in its last role, then it is pictured as being killed. Likewise, one marvels at the timorous and passive involvement of the sea beast after the mortal wound that is healed in Revelation 13. But this makes a lot of sense if the revived papacy is more ministerial, as the symbol of the woman suggests, and if the 10 kings, part of the wounded head, are crownless until the last hour. From the angle of Revelation 13, it is curious that the image of the beast is absent from the scenario in Revelation 17. However, this gets clarified when one identifies the image with the scarlet beast in its last 8th chapter. And that's my last slide. Although this analysis does not exhaust the complexities of Revelation 17, after all, it mainly tackled verses 7 through 11. It seemed to have pushed ahead in some key aspects. Thank you.
All right, at this time we're going to do 20 minutes of questions. Again, when you hold the microphone, hold it up close to the top and put the microphone close to your mouth when you ask a question.
Thank you very much. I was going through your table in the beginning. I was wondering whether Eckhard Müller was well represented in terms of the seventh head.
If it's the papacy?
Yeah.
At least this is what I remember from his 2 articles. He has 2 big articles in IS's journal.
Okay, but what I saw was it's American Protestantism.
No. The table was split into many.
Okay, if you can go back, because I was wondering.
I don't know if it's going to.
Yeah.
So it's only the papacy is down.
Okay. So what do you mean by the earth beast in American? That is what I was wondering.
The earth beast?
Yes. Because
it's probably.
That is not found, at least not found in his article of it, which he says is a suggestion.
No, I think this is related to Dr. Reynolds.
Okay, then I'm okay.
But it's the information is strained there because it didn't fit well. So
yeah. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
I have a question. You mentioned the calls to wisdom, Revelation 13, 18, and 17. And I've read that scholars, Adventists, non-Adventists, see a connection with the book of Daniel.
Mm-hmm.
Hold it up. Okay, there we go. The calls to wisdom suggest that there's a connection between chapter 17 of Revelation and the book of Daniel. Should we be looking in the book of Daniel to explain the mystery of the beast and the woman? Not a direct question to you, but just a thought question.
Sure. I think we cannot avoid the book of Daniel. It's actually fundamental, at least, for establishing the key symbols. And then, of course, when it comes to the final, let's say, scenario in Revelation, I think Revelation goes a little beyond with details and, of course, in different language also. But we can meet with Daniel probably at the end of chapter 11, chapter 12 as well, and parts of the prophecy in chapter 7, for example, when it talks about the end of the fourth beast. Yeah.
Hello, thank you for your presentation. You said we can take a lot of wisdom from Daniel to understand Revelation. In Daniel, we also find beasts with horns and heads. And those heads are integral to the beast. Why don't we apply that same understanding on the seven-headed beast? Why do we take the heads of the beast and plant them on other political entities?
I hope I understand correctly the question. What helps us in Revelation 17 is the interpretation of the angel, because the angel speaks of the seven heads as sequential powers, and that 5 of them were already fallen, and that 1 was, and then the 7th was about to come. So that helps us to understand that the beast has a long history, and it has just 1 head at a time.
But how can we then understand that the 7 beasts, according to the text, would be a short time? If it's the papacy, then it's almost 2,000 years.
Sure. I answered, in my view, it's the same, it's the language used regarding the little time of the 7th head is almost identical with the one related to Satan after he was thrown to the earth, cast to the earth in chapter 12, verse 12, I think. It says he's angry because he has a little time. But that little time is longer than the little time of the 7th head. The way I see this language, by the way, is one of my passions, nearness and delay of the parousia. I have a monograph published in Romanian. I hope to have it in English sometime. I delve extensively into this language, including there is one chapter on Revelation alone. And to me, that's the perspective from which I see this language is little time because it was supposed to be perceived as near or expected as near. Apocalyptic periods are even that they are shrinked symbolically. You know, they are days, months, years to create the impression that or to keep up to this spirit of expectedness in the New Testament. Thank you.
So, it's my turn. It seems to me like the short time, it should be understood, and it's a relative term, short, relative to what? And to me, the context in Revelation 17 is the short time relative to the other heads. So however you identify the other heads. But the question I wanted to raise was regarding the bottomless pit that the beast comes out of in 17. But you made reference to the two witnesses in chapter 11, and there's a beast that comes out of the bottomless pit and kills those two witnesses. So what's the connection between Revelation 11 and 17 in terms of the beast that comes out of the bottomless pit? Are they identical, or are they two historical events at two separate times?
Thank you. I will come back to this 11-17 parallel just to say a few words about your observation that the time is viewed in relation to the other heads. I think we can see it like that, but we are not, so to speak, forced or compelled or limited to that. So it is possible, but it's not necessarily limited to that. And some, for example, I think Dr. Reynolds and also one of my professors in Romania attach the papacy to the Roman Empire, which solves this issue, for example, of littleness. Yeah, but so there are other solutions, not necessarily only mine. Well, anyway, coming back to Revelation 17, parallel, the beast in 11 and the beast in 17. Yes, I do think is the same character for a number of reasons. On the one hand is the term beast, of course. Secondly, it's the abyss motif, and also the language of killing is found in the same places. Also, if we would explain in detail who the two witnesses are, then we would find out that actually the two witnesses are, prophets and heralds of God's message, and they are we can extend that to mean actually the saints that are persecuted or killed in 17. So on these levels, yes, I think it's the same.
So would you put those in the future to our time or in the past?
Yeah. If you are referring to the two witnesses and to what they suffer from the sea beast, yes, I put them in the future. I do have an article published on that in our theological journal. It's online, actually. It can be found. It's a proposal. I'm not dogmatic about it, but it's a proposal that I think it could go beyond the French Revolution historical interpretation, although it's probably a good, valid application historically, but it goes beyond that.
Thank you so much for the presentation. It was good. I just want a point of clarification because I may have misunderstood something. Were you suggesting that the dragon, the sea beast, and the scarlet beast are all the same entity?
Yes, in different phases.
Different phases. So what do you what do you do with Revelation 13:2, where it seems like there are two different entities? The dragon gives authority to the beast.
Sorry?
That Revelation 13:2, where it says the dragon gives his authority to the sea beast.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that?
Sure. It's the authority. given from one head to another. So what I pointed out is that although historically we are used with one head conquering another, at that stage, one head becomes royal just by inheritance, not by conquest, not by military fight. So that's how I see it.
I'm intrigued by your proposition that the 8th head is the image to the beast. I mean, it seems sensible. My question in tying that event has to do with the timing of the scarlet beast coming out of the abyss, which is right about the time when a head is wounded, if I have the chronology right, and the fact that this beast has no crowns. And Ellen White wrote about it in the chapter on the French Revolution, that it represents atheism because of the characteristics of Egypt and Sodom being combined in that philosophy. So could you please explain that a little bit more clearly within the scope of what you've presented so that I might understand it better, please?
I'm a second language speaker of English, so I hope I understood well. I hope I will phrase it well. If not, we can talk afterwards without any problem. I think Revelation 17 presents the scarlet beast in its 7 phases, and then in its last phase as an 8th, which I saw it corresponding with the image of the beast, because they both have this experience. I mean, you see, for example, in chapter 13, the sea beast being healed. But what does that healing mean? If not, that's a suggestion. It's revival in the image of the beast. So in that sense, the beast in Revelation 17 goes into the abyss and comes out from there in a new, let's say, identity or formation, keeping some things from the past, from what it was. This is how I see the two entities together, overlapping.
Okay, so when you're talking about the beast coming out of the abyss, you're suggesting that it went into the abyss before it came out.
Oh, yes, and you mentioned also atheism, right, from the perspective of Ellen White. I missed that, I forgot. I think that's a historically valid interpretation, local interpretation. I'm just saying that if I would follow Dr. Pauline, Revelation has a broader scope, and I think at the end of the day, we have to see the entire world through its lens, not only a French event, so to speak. Although that French event did have echoes in Europe, clearly. So, for example, identifying Babylon with Egypt and Sodom, that brings us to Jerusalem, because Jerusalem was called Sodom, and Jerusalem was going down to Egypt for help. So at the end of the day, these things still speak of a religious entity, although I understand that in the context of French Revolution, atheism was, the one that came out in the events, revolting against the church authority. Yeah. Anyway, we can talk more about afterwards. I might be more, clearer in a private discussion. Yes.
Thank you very much for that tidbit about the woman being drunk with the blood of the saints and tying that to the Mass. I thought that was very interesting. I do think that the text of Revelation does tell us that it has to be, the conversation in 17 has to be in John's day. But my question has to do with those 7 heads. If we look at the first beast of Revelation 13, it's like a leopard, feet of a bear, mouth of a lion, 7 heads, 10 horns. Well, it's all 4 beasts of Daniel 7 wrapped up into one, including the 7 heads and 10 horns. Now, one of the heads on the leopard is Ptolemaic Egypt. So if we start with Egypt, if we say that the 7 kings of Revelation 17 are kingdoms, well, we've got Egypt there somewhat in Daniel 7. But has anybody been able to tie the 7 kings as kingdoms in Revelation 17 with all 7 heads of Daniel 7? Because I haven't been able to do it.
I noticed that some scholars observed these 7-7 correspondence, but they are usually non-Adventist, and they are those who are more interest in the Hellenistic period of Israel or the Hellenistic domination of Israel. Yes, they go into at least Antioch and Alexandria, okay, Egypt and Syria alongside the other kingdoms, but not in the Adventist literature. I didn't find that. Yeah.
And so that would be why then nobody's been able to come up with how Thrace corresponds to the papacy?
Outside the church, you mean?
Or in the church, either way. I mean, it just seems like we should try to have the most solid Bible-based way of interpreting these things. And so if the 7 kingdom idea is correct, then it should be somehow tied to the 7 heads of Daniel 7.
Sure. One problem probably could arise from the fact that if we speak of Egypt, but we actually mean Hellenistic Egypt, we are actually talking about Greece 2 times eventually. I mean, if we talk about Greece before as a separate entity and then, later in relation to conquered territories. That would be, I think, let's say an extension, an unnecessary extension.
Let me just explain why, when we use these microphones, you should stay away from the end. Don't hold it down here. This is the what do you call it? The transmitter. This is the transmitter for up there. So you hold it up here and hold it close to your mouth, right? Thank you very much, Dr. Mott, and everyone. It's now time for lunch. Lunch is provided for those who are our speakers and people that are involved in their spouses. If you got one of these name tags, you can go into lunch. And of course, there are places to eat around here besides the village church. Across the way is the Subway, but actually a little further down is a much better place called Baguette de France. And it's owned by Adventists too. But you can also, find other places to eat around here. We reconvene at 1:30 for our afternoon session, 1:30 p.m. So there's plenty of time for lunch and fellowship and talking together and so forth. At this time, I will offer the prayer for the lunch. The lunch is down, you go out the doors, you go down the hall until you run into a wall. Don't run into the wall, turn left, and it's back in that room back there. And so at this time, let us pray. Lord, we thank you for this morning and what we've been able to talk about, the discussion of different issues. We pray, Father, for your blessing on the food that we will partake of and on our afternoon session as well. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, thank you.